seconds, 30 seconds, everyone. Wait, I'm wait. Seconds, 30 seconds, everyone. All right, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Tigard-Tualatin School Board to order at 6:32 p.m. To all of our guests, welcome. It is very exciting to see folks turning out for the board meeting. So thank you for being here. And with that, Dr. Ricky Smith, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none, Chair.
Hearing that there are no changes, I would now entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
Motion to approve the agenda has been made by Director Zerschmied and seconded by Director Jaimes. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. All right, the motion carries unanimously. And with that, we will move to recognition and good news with presenter Lisa Burton.
All right. Good evening, esteemed, I believe I can be heard. Okay, good evening, esteemed board members, superintendent, cabinet members, and guests. We are excited to present to you the 2022 Classified Employee of the Years as a kickoff to the Classified Employee Appreciation Week that we celebrate next week, March 7th through the 11th. These individuals we are recognizing this evening were nominated by their peers and administrators based on demonstrating the qualities that we are looking for in our Bev Farnsworth Excellence of Service Award. Bev Farnsworth was an incredible secretary at Byram Elementary School who demonstrated being a community builder, making a difference, and overall excellence of service. With that being said, I would like to introduce to you the following employees of the year. As I read your name, please stand up, come forward, and line up along the left side. So, starting us off, Ann Lofton, Head Secretary, Alberta Ryder Elementary School. Lori Teggett, Title I Assistant, Testing Coordinator, Bridgeport Elementary. Sonia Cummings, EDSIA, Byram Elementary School. Alyssa Alafan, Attendance Secretary, Creekside Community School. And if I could have you guys come all the way around, it's all right. Erin Hezekiah, Building Day Specialist, CFT. Susan Johnson, Title I Assistant, Deer Creek. Rochelle Perez, Family Partnership Advocate, Durham Elementary. Chris Merritt, Head Secretary, Fowler Middle School. Todd Winter, Head Custodian, Hazelbrook Middle School. Jolene Newcomb, Learning Specialist Assistant, Metzger Elementary School. Heather Vanderbilt, Learning Specialist Assistant, Meridian Program, Mary Woodward. John Neely, Warehouse Food Service, Nutrition Services. Danny Gavaza, Facilities Administrative Assistant, Operations Department. Judy Diana Morales, Counseling Secretary and former FPA, Tigard High School. Sarah Dinger, Head Secretary, Tualatin TTVA. Augie Hendrick, Food Service Assistant, Tualatin Elementary School. Marie Shopler, Head Secretary, Tualatin High School. Diane Bauer, Payroll and Benefits Specialist, Hibbert. Caitlin Brown, Family Partnership Advocate, Templeton Elementary School. Robert Odell, Trainer and Driver Lead Transportation. Cynthia Jones, Media Specialist, Tualatin Middle School. So let's give a final round of applause to our 2022 Employee of the Year recipients as they move front and center. All right, so before we dismiss, each recipient will receive a small token of appreciation from the district, which says their names, 2022 Classified Employee of the Year, in grateful appreciation of your service to Tigard-Tualatin School District. Furthermore, recipients will receive a gift basket from our community partner, Home for Heroes. Homes for Heroes is an organization that strives to be involved in their community and support local heroes, such as the incredible education service members among us. Here this evening, representing this organization is Don Nipple and Eric Green. You guys can wave. Now for the recipient of the Bev Farnsworth Excellence of Service Award. I would hand over the mic to Dr. Sue to introduce and name this recipient. Dr. Sue.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna come up forward here, so. You do short straw. Thank you so much. So this evening, it's a distinct pleasure. This is the second year in a row that I've had the opportunity to award this award, and it is so meaningful on so many different levels. And each and every one of you embodies what Bev was, and we are so pleased and proud to have you here in front of us. So another round of applause for our members. But since only one can take the Bev Platinum Award, this person has been working in Ttsd for 20 years and always goes above and beyond in building connections with students and the broader community. This person is a stable for building our school garden and regularly attends community garden parties. This person participates actively in cultivating the successful bounty that our garden provides the community. This person also helps harvest the food from the garden that is used to provide fresh food for our students. This person has a unique way to build connections with students and uses humor and kindness to make each individual student feel seen, valued, and loved. This person makes a point to learn not only the names of students at our school, but also their likes and dislikes or special information about each child. Because she sees students year after year, she's able to build deep relationships with students. Students find her to be cool, not only because she was the first woman to race a jet-powered dragster reaching speeds up to 300 miles per hour, but also because she is authentic and genuinely herself every day. She is a role model for students because she demonstrates that everyone can march to the beat of their own drum and be true to who they are. She accepts every child as they come and strives to bring out the best in each student, using her role in food service to do so. Aggie always prepares food as she would want to eat it, fresh and warm. Students are blessed by her ability to go the extra mile. Once, Aggie was absent and students were wondering why their bagels that day were cold. What they didn't realize is that Aggie takes extra time to heat up food that could be served cold but tastes better warm. She also single-handedly runs the entire kitchen because she does not have an assistant. Recently, a student lost her beloved pet chicken Goldie to a hungry hog. She was visibly upset and Aggie took time to comfort this child. The next day, Aggie came to school and prepared a special scrambled egg breakfast for this child and dressed up in a chicken suit, complete with egg earrings, and held space for the student to share her grief and her love for her chicken. The child was overjoyed to be celebrating the life of her Silky and said that the eggs were the best that she had ever eaten. Aggie replied, "That's because they were made with love." That student will forever remember that the adult in her life that shared her grief and acknowledged the bond she had with her chicken. Excuse me, I need to take one more page, if I could. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Every day, Aggie extends that same love to the staff and students at our school. Every day, we know that Aggie is a safe space for us, that she cares about us individually, and that we have someone to whom we can share life's ups and downs, joy and grief, triumphs and tragedies. Written by Melissa Hinkle, music teacher at Tualatin Elementary. And so it is my profound pleasure and great honor this evening to say that our second annual Bev Farnsworth Excellence of Service recipient is Aggie Hendricks, food service assistant at Tualatin Elementary. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. It is truly an honor to be able to hand off this award to our very own Aggie Hendricks, who is part of the face and definitely a large part of the heart of Tualatin Elementary and the school community. So with that, and on behalf of all of our students and staff and family members and community partners, this is a well-deserved, and you're a great representative of Tualatin Elementary and what the school community can really be.
Okay, here we go. Back for the picture. I hope you all love the baskets I made you. Thank you. All right.
3, 2, 1, 1. Okay. You want to get on Ready? 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
For folks streaming at home, we're doing a few more photos to commemorate the award. All right. We do have a. It's an uphill climb. All right. We've got another public comment. All right. Well, thank you to everybody who joined us for that, for the Employee of the Year Award. We still have folks slowly circulating out. So with that, the next item on the agenda is actually a resolution to commemorate Classified Employee Appreciation Week. Thank you. No, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, so with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
I heartily move that the Tigard-Tualatin School Board adopt resolution 2122-15, recognizing the excellent work performed by the classified employees of our district and proclaiming the week of March 7 through 11, 2022 as Classified Employee Appreciation Week.
Second.
All right, motion has been made by Director Zerschmied and seconded by Vice Chair Lynn. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I just wish we hadn't lost our audience before we did.
I will say, you know, first of all, that was probably the happiest moment of our school board this year. So that was very cool. And thank you to the communications team for putting that together, and the human resources team. That was very fun. And I did just want to make a note that classified employees and almost all employees right now have a lot of options of work they could be doing, especially in this economy. And those folks who we just honored and their colleagues chose public service and they chose serving kids. And it just means a lot. And I don't know, I was just blown away by how joyful that was and grateful we got to have that opportunity. So other comments from board members?
I would just say that, I mean, everyone in school buildings, having taught in many, are the heart and soul of buildings. And I think we oftentimes think of teachers as the main heart and soul, and the classified as evidence today by all of these wonderful people up here. Those folks that don't often stand front and center in that room are truly heart and souls of those schools for those students, the people that do kind of create those extra safe spaces, and they do that by way of food or library time or whatever that happens to be. They really are extra special, and it was pretty special to see all of these people from the buildings here, all of the family and friends that came to celebrate that. So that was wonderful.
You know, I think of the word educator as being a broad term, but it doesn't just deal with teachers. It doesn't just include teachers. It includes really everybody in the building. Everybody in the school building is an educator in one way or another. And it's clear to me that this district recognizes that and values the amazing accomplishment, but also the contribution that folks in the building make, you know, regardless of position and role. So because it takes a village, and we have to all work together to ensure that our students are learning at the highest level. So, you know, kudos to district leadership for recognizing the fundamental and important role that staff play in the district. And congratulations to all of you who received those awards. Thanks.
All right, hearing no further discussion, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. All right, motion passes unanimously. Very, very good way to start the meeting. Okay, with that, we will move to student representative reports. Who would like to go first? Okay, so kind of just to start, coming back to school, it's been like we in leadership specifically for ASB. This has been an explosion and like interest in planning activities. So like powder puffs being planned, powder tough, planning open mics, activities committees have been really busy, and that's like some liveliness that's been like that we just haven't seen like up until this point. And I think that given that we're in the middle of the school year, that's really exciting. Everybody's getting excited for prom. And so that's kind of where the state of the school is at. It's like, we're ready to just kind of explode into everything. On that same kind of note, Club Fair just happened recently, and spring sports are starting. Club Fair was honestly probably just as good as Club Rush. When we had it in the beginning of the year, there were lots of signups. I am president of 3 clubs. So for every single lunch that I was at, there was probably like 25 signups. And so that's pretty good, I would say. I also had donuts though, so that might have skewed my findings. We also, Race to Raise is coming up. That's another event that we're talking about. There's been a lot of signups. There's a lot of interest that we've seen, and that's super exciting, especially with the huge gap that's happened given COVID. And then kind of on that same note as well, my freshman year, we had the Voices Assembly. And that's coming back. That's what we're planning to do. We're planning to do it somehow in the auditorium. It's very in its rudimentary stage, but that's definitely something that's expressed interest from the seniors now when they were freshmen and did it. And we're really excited to get HR to really like forward that in leadership. We also, just as a little something to be happy about, there was the State Ethics Bowl that happened on February 12th. On a Saturday, and Tigard had 2 teams, and both of them were only 1 vote off going to the semifinals of state, which were the first 2 Tigard teams to both win a match, let alone 2 matches against some formidable opponents. We were in one debate against Jesuit, for example, so that was Jesuit and Lincoln usually win, and so it was really great to like nearly be in that tandem and be so successful. Back towards some more administrative things. I've recently been talking with Mr. Bailey as well as Miss Daly and Mr. Davila about moving into like an idea for universal peer tutoring at Tigard. It's very split at Tigard, it feels like, with NHS doing some and some other clubs. And so I was looking to make a more systematic approach to peer tutoring after school and in some other ways. And so we're looking to after school programming and how we have the library open with teachers to getting students to be there and making it much clearer about their signups. This is an opportunity and we have homework help available. And then I've also begun talking to some of the department chairs at Tigard to kind of discuss like how we can name classes. Because I think that when I was going through the list, a lot of students were blowing off courses given the names of some of them. Like intro to engineering, for example. I know that it was like intro versus it being just engineering 1. And so I have decided that it'd be a good idea to talk to those department chairs and discuss if we can name courses so that they get more students that are actually interested in that area, as well as like creating some harder courses at Tigard, some more middle ground ones, because it feels kind of diametric, I think, to a lot of students. And with that, that's my report.
Okay, on the Tualatin side, I would agree with Henry. There's definitely a big push for events and community building activities. We just had our second Bob Ross night, which was just as successful, if not more successful than our first. And Bob Ross night, for those who are unaware, we host in the Commons after school. Anybody who wants to come and paint and hang out with friends, and supplies are provided, and it was really fun. I went for a little bit. And today was our first indoor assembly since COVID, and it was because of the weather. We did it in 3 groups divided up by type of class that you were in, and it went really smoothly. It was our assembly for our Mr. and Mrs. Timberwolf Pageant, which is this Friday. You guys should all definitely come. It's Friday, March 7th, or March 4th, excuse me, at 7 p.m. in the auditorium. I'm one of the contestants, so you should definitely donate to to Mrs. and Mrs. Full IB to help us win. Anyways, spring sports started today. And Wednesday we have a comedy sports show, and ACT Day is next Tuesday. All that in mind, I think the big thing that's on students' minds right now is the mask mandate ending right as we go into spring break. And I think the general consensus is this desire to be able to make a choice for each student for themselves without judgment. And I think that's what everyone, regardless of their belief, relative to whether they will continue to wear a mask or not, I think that's the one uniting factor. And that's all I have.
Very nice. Any questions for our student representatives? I actually do have to ask a question. So you mentioned the ethics bowl, but I believe you're the founder of this club, the ethics club. Can you actually explain a little bit what is the Tigard High Ethics Club? What do you do? How does it work? I've never heard of this.
So Ethics Club, it's basically because we had these two teams at the Ethics Bowl, there was no like official club for it. It was really like a thing that was put on by our TOK teacher. And like he would get us involved in it. People who were interested in it could do it. And so after doing the Ethics Bowl, a lot of the students that were a part of those two teams, there was 9 of us, were like, we don't want to stop. We want to keep doing it. And the Ethics Bowl itself is basically a public forum kind of thing, kind of like debate. But at the beginning, you have 2 teams. One team will present, and then the other team responds respectfully. It's not about like engaging in actual debate as much as it's building an argument and then reforming that argument. It's really about critical thinking and philosophy. And so after doing that, we decided we should make a club for it because really the motivation was, well, Jesuit has a club for it and they win, and we don't want Jesuit to win, we want to win. So being the competitive people that we are, we were like, let's make a club for it, do it year round, and really blow it out of the park when we get to it again next year. And there were only 3 seniors in it. So we were like, the juniors, we need to like, there's just already a platform for it. And so Ethics Club really is an extension of TOK in that way, teaches students more ethical frames, ways to think about the world, as well as like prepping people for debates and public forums. And so it's kind of like a debate class, but really centered on philosophy.
That is very cool. And kudos for founding the club, and kudos to Mahaffey for the Timberwolf Pageant. Very exciting times. Okay, with that, we will move into Superintendent and Board Communication. Dr. Ricky Smith.
Thank you. I'll be brief this evening as we have a fairly extensive report to you relative to second quarter goals and our high school graduation data. That said, 3 things just top of mind. First is thank you to Director Urban for joining us at Durham Elementary for No Place for Hate signing day. And I also learned my place in the herd in this community when my name was announced, and there was sort of this quizzical look on the look of children's faces. And then they announced the mayor of Tigard, and they immediately said the president's coming. And there was almost a standing ovation. So I told the mayor that I have been thoroughly chastised and humbled and appreciated his support. But it was a great day to see kiddos not just sign the pledge, but able to talk to you about why that pledge matters to them. Second piece is typically when a superintendent goes to a conference, she brings home T-shirts for the board. In this case, I brought you a book, and to our student reps as well. I had an opportunity to speak to the author, Derek Black, who was a law professor at the University of South Carolina, and has also founded an education equity foundation at Howard University, and speaks in this book about the power of public education and how it changed his life, and living in poverty and other conditions that you will find interesting. But when I read the book and had the conversation with Professor Black, it was very clear to me that it sounded a great deal about similar to the work that you all are doing. And so I commend it to you, and I'll be interested to hear what you have to say as you read the book and some of your thoughts about that. Lastly, just as a reminder, thank you for supporting the shift in our next board meeting from March 14th to March 7th. This is aligned with the governor's announcement today, along with the governors of California and Washington, moving once again for a third time the date relative to returning local control to districts around COVID mitigation, of which masking is part, to the 11:59 p.m. on March 11th, which effectively means it starts on March 12th, which is a Saturday. And so this will give us an opportunity to present the district's plan relative to optional masking, and then and other thoughts around that, and then prepare all for that eventual transition. If any of you had an opportunity to hear the press conference today, the metrics are looking extremely favorable, and we're all holding our breath that they stay so. But both hospitalizations and case rates are dropping precipitously far ahead of schedule than was anticipated on March 31st. And so we are pleased with that good news, and we'll respond. So I'll take any questions from the board.
Any questions for Dr. Rika Smith? I just want to say thank you for the flexibility in flipping the meeting so we could get that happening before it took effect. I think that's really important.
Thanks for mine, Chair, and I appreciate that. And it may require us to have a special board meeting relative to employee contracts, because March 15th is our deadline, and I will keep you posted. That's something that you and Vice Chair Lynn and I can discuss about how to manage that. So, but thank you for your flexibility.
All right. Board reports. Who would like to go first? Director Urban.
I'll start. I don't have a ton this time. Like Dr. Sue said, I was able to join her as well as Dr. McCall, the mayor, some of our SROs, as special guests at the signing of the No Place for Hate pledge. So all the students who were there K-5 during their lunchtime got to come in and sign. The fifth graders, we actually had a paper mache road runner head that they were able to sign as for their kind of fifth grade send off. So it was wonderful being there. It was fun to see a bunch of kiddos again. And yes, it was hilarious that the kiddo that saw Mayor Snyder come in and said, "The president is here," and then ran up to him promptly at the end saying, "I am your biggest fan," and then looked at it and said, "What is your name?" That was charming, and that's why students are fantastic. The only other update quickly is that the health curriculum committee is moving forward. We had some presentations from some publishers on some middle school and high school curriculum, so we are kind of keeping that process underway and evaluating what we heard and deciding if that's sort of meeting our evaluation criteria, and we'll meet again in the next couple of weeks to continue that process.
Very good.
So I had the opportunity to meet with students at Tualatin High School last week, asking them specifically about how they felt about masking. And what I heard from students very much matches what Mahathi reported. Students want to be able to make the decision for themselves. I did hear a number of students say, we think mask optional is great. However, I myself will be wearing my mask, which made me feel better as well. Now I've lost my train of thought. I also heard from students last week that there were students who, after our last board meeting, did not want to come to another board meeting because they were afraid for their own physical safety, given some of the comments that were made at the last board meeting and some of the behaviors of some of the audience. So I just want to state that while the board does its business in public, we are not here to debate with the public. And we are all the grown-ups in the room. And I want to make sure we all act like the grown-ups in the room, and keeping kids safe and feeling included really should be at the top of our radar. And so if you're a grown-up in the room, I would like you to act like the grown-up in the room and not scare or intimidate children.
Thank you, Director Kirschner. Director Jaimes, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Yes, thank you. I got the opportunity. Well, first of all, let's start off with congratulating the winners of the Classified of the Year and the Bev Farnsworth Award. So congratulations. And I got a chance to attend a meeting with the Oregon Latino Leadership Network where we talked about transportation and how that affects the Latino community, and how we're taking a survey that we're going to send out so that we can see how to better the transportation, as well as working with ODOT and TriMet, and see how we can better serve the underserved community. And that could lead to some direct ties with Tigard, and so that's something that I'll keep on reporting on. Just going back to what Director Searchmeet just mentioned, yes, we do need to be intentional in what is said at board meetings, and unfortunately, like Director Searchmeet already mentioned, we cannot dialogue or debate the public, and so everybody should come in with a lens of how is this going to affect students, whether you're on whatever aisle of the political line. You still have to have that lens of how is this going to affect students. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Vice Chair Lynn.
Yes, I'd like to support the comments of my fellow board members who are expressing concern about safety. In particular, the perception that I think some people left here with last board meeting, that this is not a safe place to be. And, we've talked a lot about that. And we want to protect the right of the community to engage in the board. It's an essential part of living in a democracy, right? Is that we get to have our say, we get to show up and disagree, but we have to do that peacefully. And when we have to be concerned about the safety of our students and our staff, I think it threatens our ability to really be able to engage in democratic dialogue with each other. So very, very, very important. The other thing I want to speak to is the questioning of Black History Month. As the first African-American member of this board, I was offended. And I spoke to others who were also deeply offended and deeply hurt. And so while you have the right, because of the First Amendment, to say what you like to say, understand that it has consequences. And in this case, it was hurtful to a number of people. In fact, probably to an entire community. Black History Month exists because of the lack of representation of Black culture and history in the general curriculum, in our society. And so it exists as an opportunity for us to learn and to share. And so for that to be questioned is very deeply hurtful for many of us. And I take exception with the idea that my history and my culture doesn't deserve to be learned. So again, I want to say, and I want to encourage continued participation in the dialogue, but recognize that our words and our actions have consequences that can negatively impact a lot of people. The last thing I'll say is to thank you to the SROs who helped us manage that situation and continue to be present each time of the board meeting. And so I think, you deserve some thanks. Thank you for your presence.
Well said from each of our board members. And I'll echo the gratitude to our SROs and our operations staff who helped us navigate a really challenging situation last board meeting. Briefly, I wanted to mention this at the top, but we did have a work session prior to this board meeting, a long work session on the TTSD strategic plan. Thank you to our vice chair and Director Urban for the work you put into that. And I know we've got several more meetings scheduled on this item moving forward. I wanted to give a shout out to the Tualatin boys basketball team, who is ranked #1 in state with the APR ranking, the RPI ranking, the Collie ranking, and the OSAA ranking, which is sort of unheard of. So kudos to Mr. Delorbe. You'll have to share our congratulations to the team as we get ready for, for playoffs. Next year is Tiger Deal, don't worry. And I will be a judge at the Mr. Timberwolf Pageant. So I will not be playing any favorites for any students, but I do hope that the community comes out. That was a really fun event when I was in high school, and I'm glad it's continuing. And then finally, 2 committees moving forward. The SRO task force meets tomorrow, and the strategic financial planning committee will meet next week. And so I'll bring reports to those in future meetings. And yeah, I'm reflecting on Vice Chair Lynn's comments, and I appreciate you saying that and speaking to that. I've been, like I think a lot of us, been following the situation in Eastern Europe with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and thinking about, it doesn't impact us directly, but it is a reminder of the responsibility that we have and the good fortune that we have to be operating in this system. And I've just been reflecting on that. And I think your comments about behaving in a democracy and what it means and the consequences are really resonating with me. So thank you for that. Any other board comments?
Sure, yes. I wanted to say that I believe it's going to be on Wednesday and Thursday, but correct me if I'm wrong if either one of you knows about the calling that the Foundation for the Tigard-Tualatin is going to do. Yes, Director Urban.
Tuesday and Wednesday.
Tuesday and Wednesday. Yeah, so I want to make sure that everybody who gets a call, please answer the call and donate to help bridge the gap or the learning gap for more teachers.
Okay, with that, I will close the superintendent and board communication agenda item, and we'll move to the first of 2 public comments. This public comment section is for current agenda items only. So I will read the rules of the public comment, but first I wanted to check and see, is Lenore Schaefer here? Okay, then it does not matter. Okay, so the first up will be, is Gabriel Bueller here? Okay, Gabriel, you'll be first, and then Janet, you'll be second. So I'll read through the rules here. As Director Zerschmied mentioned, Tigard-Tualatin School Board meetings are public meetings, meaning that the business of the board is conducted in an open meeting for the public to observe as required by law. However, regular public comment at board meetings is a policy choice of the school board, not a legal requirement. As the board values input from our students, parents, and district community members that we serve, the board provides these opportunities for community members to provide input on important topics. In addition to public comment, community members may submit written comments to the board secretary at each meeting or email comments directly to the school board. The email addresses of the school board can be found on the district website. And I do want to thank, we have 2 written comments that the board you should have received. This section of public comment is for items directly related to the board meeting agenda. Public comments regarding board agenda item, regarding non-agenda items will be shared at the second public comment portion. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes and should be brief and concise. Speakers may offer objective criticism of district operations or programs, but the board will not hear complaints concerning specific district personnel. We are also unable to hear praise or commendations about district personnel, but invite you to submit your commendations to the superintendent. If the public, this will not matter because we only have 2 signed up. Okay, so a little bit of protocol, and thank you, Thor, for mentioning this. You'll have a microphone in front of you, and this applies to all folks speaking tonight. Thor wants us to know the louder and closer you are to the microphone, the clearer it will be, especially for folks listening at home. Please wear your mask while you speak and speak directly into the microphone. Before your comments, please share your zip code. Director Zerschmied at the end of the table here will be timing. She'll hold a 1-minute signal up when you have 1 minute left. And then you'll hear the alarm when your time is up. You may finish the last few words of your sentence, but at 3 minutes, your time has expired. If you would like your public comment to be reflected in the meeting minutes of the board meeting, please provide a written copy to Patty Roberts, our board secretary. Also, please know, as has been mentioned this evening, that public comment is an opportunity for the board to listen to the community. In general, we as a board do not engage in dialogue in this portion of the agenda. Instead, we are here to listen. Additional public comments are always welcome to be submitted to the school board via email as we receive many. Okay, with that, Gabriel, I'll invite you to come forward to the table. And you'll just want to make sure that the green light is on. If it's on, then you're good to go. And take your time, but Director Zershini will start the timer once you begin speaking.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm here to talk tonight about your change of language in the bonded employees and officers. I have serious problems with what you're planning on changing this wording to. You're striking the language of the superintendent and other individuals as deemed necessary by the board will have individual fidelity, bond coverage, or equivalent crime coverage. And nowhere does that wording that you want to replace it say anything about a crime. Are you worried that you created a crime in the last 2 years? Why would you strike that language from the record? I'm sure you're probably pretty aware that multiple school boards have been served against their bonds or insurance all over the United States. So again, I ask you, why are you taking out the language that says crime and replacing it with the district will pay the cost of such coverage? That says to me, the taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer in this district. So instead of having individual fidelity bond coverage, now you want the taxpayers to pay for your crimes? Is that what the message that you're trying to get across to the voters? Voters might have something to say about that this fall. Another concern that I have is that you get to choose this. You get to choose this for yourself. How can you serve the people when you choose like this? Your rules before these meetings don't serve the people. I don't know how you're going to get elected, Ben.
Thank you for your public comment. I will just.
Before you go, could you please come back and give your zip code for the record?
97223.
Thank you.
I will just clarify so we're all clear. This proposed change is not coming from the school board or from district staff. Even this is actually a recommendation from the Oregon School Boards Association's attorneys. And my understanding, and hopefully we can get clarification on this, is this doesn't actually change district practices. This is just a reflection of changes in policy. So we'll get to the bottom of that, but this was not something that any of us proposed. This was something brought to us as a highly recommended policy by the entity that provides our insurance coverage. So we will look into it, but thank you for the public comment. Our next public comment is from Janet Bailey.
Hi, you guys. We meet again. 97062. I come here this evening to comment on the first reading of the board policy item X.D. which includes a change or updated language to the current rules regarding insurance coverage to that of being bonded. There seems to be a lot of information going around these days about insurance coverage versus bonding. We find it interesting that you propose to change the language for employees and officers. So if you break the law, you are no longer responsible. If you get sued, the coverage changes from personal coverage to district coverage. And with this language change, you're trying to slide through we the people becoming responsible for covering your lawless behavior. So how can you be a servant of the people when you're trying to pull shady deals like this? This sleazy dishonesty is disgusting, and it's not going unnoticed. I didn't know it had to do with the other organization, which we don't like either, but I worded this towards you, and maybe that's inappropriate.
Thank you for the public comment. Yeah, we will, this is the first reading of this policy. The board has not reviewed this as a board. But we will look into your concerns and hopefully get an opinion from the School Boards Association about why this change was recommended, and encourage folks to tune into the second reading because we won't have an opportunity to ask them prior to the first reading this evening. Okay, with that, I will close the first public comment portion of the agenda, and we will move into reports and discussions. The first item is superintendent goals and high school first semester course completion and graduation data update from presenter Dr. Ricky Smith. Dr. Sue.
One more. All right. And, yeah, everybody wants to, there we go. Okay. All right. Good evening, Chair Bowman and directors. This evening, we will provide you, as regularly scheduled, the second quarter of the year relative to report on my goals for evaluation, as well as an in-depth review of the recent 2021 four-year cohort graduation rates and current work relative to at the high school levels relative to course completion and forecasting of ongoing of the next four-year cohort graduation rates. With me this evening are Director Fields relative to secondary education, Paul Verstraete, who manages our assessment data and does it extremely well, Principal Bailey from Tigard High School, Principal Romas from Creekside Community High School, and Principal Tlerba from Tualatin High School. With that, next slide, please, whoever's got the changer. Thank you. And so as a reminder, the overall arching goal for this year was to see a 5% growth overall for all populations and an 8% academic growth for historically underserved. At kinder through 8th, this is specific to iReady Math and iReady Reading Literacy. And at the 9th through 12th grade, it was focused to 9th grade on track, credit attainment, and pointing towards graduation rates. Next slide, please. Again, I would remind you that there are the two of the 5 evaluation standards by which you will evaluate my performance this year. Standard 1, and next slide, please. Standard 5, which also deals with academic outcomes. Next slide, please. Thank you. Paul.
So this year, this winter, we did our.
Hang on, I'm going to, are we on?
All right, so this past month, we did our winter window for our assessments. This occurred, unfortunately, during the middle of the large Omicron wave, so we do have yet one more asterisk to add to our data. As a data person, it's always upsetting when that occurs. I do want to say that when it comes to participation in these assessments, we did have a slightly lower participation in our 8th grade, as you can see with the iReady. We did make our maze assessment optional, and so the data on that is not going to be something that we can compare to previous administrations. It was mostly for the teachers to use for their own instruction. Next slide. So we are going to be talking about 2 assessments when it comes to our K-8 data, which is our Cadence Assessment, which is an assessment of foundational reading skills, as well as our iReady assessment, which gets us to different domains within reading and literacy. The growth that each of these measures is slightly different. The Cadence Assessment sets each test a little bit more difficult than the previous one. And growth is determined by keeping pace with that difficulty. So a student is able to stay on track or on level if they can meet the needs of that test in the fall, and then the test gets a little harder in the winter, and then so can they keep up with that getting a little bit harder. The iReady assessment is slightly different. It is a computer adaptive assessment, which means that every time a student sits down, the test will adapt to see how hard the questions can get before the student is unable to keep moving. So every time they sit down, it gives them a level. So a student is able, with each assessment, to see what level they are at. Moving on to the next assessment. With those two assessments, I do want to say that although our winter window this year is still lower than it was pre-COVID, it is also important to note that this is only for K1, because this time last year, we only did a Cadence K1 last year. It is still higher than in the fall, which means that more students are able to keep pace with the increasing difficulty of this test this year. So we are moving students, and normally this time of year, we do see a dip in our scores. So it is very exciting to be able to see that it's going up this time of year. And for the iReady, because it is adaptive each time, what you want to see is the number of students on track continually growing. So you don't want just a small increase, you want a very large increase, because you want a year's worth of growth out of the students. And so when I show the graph, it'll be much more easy to understand. So if we move on to the next one, this is the Acadians growth. As you can see from the dark blue to, the dark red in the fall to the dark red in winter, you can see that last year we did have a drop from the fall to the winter, whereas we are reversing that this year for kindergarten, as well as we are increasing our growth for first grade. We do have some data for second grade, but last year's second grade was not mandatory, so that's why we're not showing that comparison. We're not highlighting that comparison right now. Moving on to the next one. This is all in the board packet, by the way, as well. There's specific page numbers in that board packet as well. So this is the iReady. And so what you see when it comes to this one, I am happy to stop a second if y'all want to find it. I want to make sure you're able to see it in front of you. But what you want to do is you want to see the dark purple in the fall grow to about halfway of the light purple, because all those in light purple are just starting out at the previous grade level. So it's a second grader that was a second grader last year walking into a third grade classroom, understanding everything they knew last year. That's the light purple. And they just need to grow 1 year to stay on pace. So you want that dark purple, which are students who are already meeting the goals for the end of the year, to grow. And therefore the light purple goes away and the dark purple grows. And so, for example, what you can see is that third grade, we are already halfway through the year doing very well compared to where we want to be at the end of the year. We do have some grade levels that are a little bit harder to meet our goals by the end of the year. Moving on to the next slide. Mathematics, we only have our iReady assessments. And again, iReady was taken during the Omicron wave. And so for both the iReady, I apologize for not saying this for the reading part, some students took the assessment from home while some students took it in the building, depending on if they took it before we closed for the secondary for that 1 week. And so some students took it from home and some took it in the building. Next slide. The next slide. Oh, thank you. For math is, as Dr. Sue said earlier in the presentation, is an area of need for us. And so our math scores are a little bit lower, but that is a national trend where scores in the fall were much lower across the country. It was harder hit by the pandemic. So if we do go to the next slide, you'll see the difference between our math versus our reading scores. For reading, you can see, for math, you can see that we are not making as much ground, but we are still growing. Students are still continuing to grow in math. And if you look at the next slide, you can see, this is a slide I added showing those national trends. And so you can see that we are doing better, getting back to pre-pandemic levels than our other schools using iReady in Oregon. We are on pace with the national average, and we are getting closer to that pre-pandemic average.
And one other caveat that I would share with you all here is that with iReady, we are now able to actually teach directly to the state standards. which were adjusted in 2014, but then we were in the midst of the Great Recession and many districts, including this one, where we're not able to purchase curriculum that aligned with that. And so teachers are also, as part of making this shift and using the assessment tool, they're also learning about new standards that they have to teach at their level that they haven't taught previously. And so we're experiencing a bit of that shift, if you will, that always occurs when state standards shift. And so we anticipate, both with a continued focus to mathematics with this tool, that we will continue to close that gap, and teachers will continue to build their skill set relative to the new content, if you will, that's now, well past 5 years in terms of a state standard, and get greater facility with that content.
The next slide. Attendance. With attendance, we do have higher rates of chronic absenteeism this year than in previous years. Part of that, as the second bullet point says, is because we are including students that are in quarantine, as well as students that did have COVID. So pretty much chronic absenteeism is a rate of just students that are not in the building for whatever reason. It's not because of truancy or any of that, they're just not there. And so COVID is a major impact on that chronic rate of absenteeism. However, one area of growth is that middle school was very difficult for middle school last year for attendance, so this year, attendance rates for middle school are actually a little bit higher than they were last year. And the rates of chronic absenteeism are higher for all students, but it is not proportional across students by race and ethnicity. Our historically underserved populations do have higher rates of chronic absenteeism than our white students. Next slide, please. Office discipline referrals. The rates of reported incidents and bullying and harassment are on track to go back to what they were before the pandemic, meaning they are much higher than they were during the pandemic when, of course, no one was in the building. And so we are going to be seeing the same level of office discipline referrals that we saw before the pandemic for bullying and harassment. Elementary principals have reviewed this data at this month's levels meeting to inform building level action, and the district PBIS team has also reviewed the data and is developing strategies for working with staff across all levels around the fact that the rates are not proportional across student populations, similar to the chronic absenteeism data. Students of color are referred to the office at a higher rate than our white students. Moving on to the next slide, course performance. Rates of good course performance for both middle and high school are higher than in previous years at this time. And that means that for middle schoolers, there are fewer students that are failing one or more classes. And for ninth grade, there are more students passing and getting credits than there were in previous year, than there were specifically last year. Next slide, I believe that gets us to the end of this particular portion.
So I'll just open up and then we go back to Paul, but we have the opportunity tonight to talk about our high school graduation rates. And I will just say, I think everybody up here, this awesome high school team, would also acknowledge it wouldn't happen without the pre-K 8 work that's come before us. And then we take that baton and we keep the work going. So I just want to honor that we are carrying on the good work. Paul.
All right. So I get to talk about some of my favorite things today, which is data. So this is going to be a lot of me talking numbers. But I want to start off with the definition of the graduation rate we are presenting, because there are multiple graduation rates that one could present. We are presenting on something called a cohort graduation rate, which means they take every student that entered into high school in ninth grade and follow them until they are expected to graduate 4 years later. They adjust this cohort based on students that transfer out of the district and transfer in the district. But that's the data that we are presenting is the 4-year cohort rate, which means students that entered in ninth grade and graduated as expected 4 years later. So that is the data specifically we are presenting. The state does also have a 5-year graduation as well as completer rates. And if that is information that you would like us to provide, I am happy to pull together information on those other rates as well. Moving on to the next one. So this year we do have the highest level of graduation our district has seen since ODE started publishing this data back in the 2007-2008 school year. And so, pause for dancing. I have it in my notes.
What's truly terrifying is that's my tenure on the board.
Terrifying is an interesting word for such a wonderful graph, I must say. So yes, we have continually grown our graduation rates with a few dips along the way, of course, but our graduation rates are continually going up. Next slide. Focusing in on this last 5 years and this year, we did see a very high rate of growth from the first year of the pandemic, which was the 2019-20 graduation rate. I do want to say that increase is not unheard of. If you look at the comparison between the first two and the last two, you do see about the same level of growth. So this is not an inflated graduation rate growth, because this is not an unheard of growth in graduation rates. And so this is the first bit of evidence for the hypothesis that this is not pandemic induced higher graduation rates, as in lower expectations. This is the culmination of work that the district has been doing. Moving on to the next slide, I'm going to get into a little bit of that. And so that understanding our graduation rate numbers, the state did have a policy of waiving essential skills, but I do want to say that that is not, in my opinion, a reason why our graduation rates went up this year, because this is a statewide policy. And you would expect to see with a statewide policy the same rate of improvement across the state. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we went up last year, whereas the rest of the state went down. And we did the opposite the previous year. And so this is something that I would say is more in line with the work we're doing as a district, rather than because of this statewide policy. Also, moving on to the next one, that when I did go to the graduation before the pandemic, I found no student that met essential skills, that met credits and did not meet essential skills. There was no student in that category. All students that did not graduate, it was because of credits. That was the number, that was why they did not graduate.
And is it usually math and science, or is it usually a core credit why they're not that they're missing, or does it vary?
I don't have that specific data.
It would be next to impossible to track without going individual, because there are 24 credits required by the state, and each of those credit requirements are set in different categories. It would be really difficult to say where they were at. The important thing to notice is that not a single TTS student didn't graduate because of lacking their essential skills.
Right.
And so removing that with the statewide doesn't change our graduation barrier at all. It just actually aligns with the work that our kids are doing.
Let me ask it a different way. Are there students who have a sufficient total number of credits but still don't graduate because they're missing specific credits? Or is that also very unusual?
I would say that likelihood is there every single year. It's rare.
Okay.
And I'll say that it's rare because our 26 credit diploma option for TTSD includes 2 additional elective credits.
Right.
If a student is at risk of graduating, we can very easily move them to a 24 credits state of Oregon diploma and remove those elective barriers, thereby making sure that if they have their core credits, they've met them.
Got it. Got it.
And that is how I went through to determine the 0 students, is I found all students that had above 24 credits and checked to see whether or not they graduated or not. And so the ones that I found above 24, it was because of individual. So there, I think it was less than 10 students the year before the pandemic that I had to go in individually and see whether or not they ended up graduating. So that is how I determined that.
I really appreciate the level of analysis here. This is super helpful information, because I do think that there's a widespread sense that, oh, there's essential skills there. It didn't really affect our numbers at all. So that's important to know, and I appreciate you doing the research.
Yeah, and I would say then that, Chair Bowman, it's not rocket science. I mean, if graduation is about credit attainment, I mean, I sat here and listened to you describe all the effort put into ensuring that students get the credits they need, right, to graduate. So if you know what the problem is, and then you take an approach that is aligned absolutely to that problem, to solving that problem, you're going to have results. Yeah. And that's what happened. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because I've heard too that this is about lowering standards, and clearly it's not. Thanks.
Well said.
I do have one question. Do we have data on how many of our students graduated with a TTSD diploma versus how many of our students graduated with a state diploma?
I do not have that data this evening.
Get it?
We can get it. I would like to see that, because I want to make sure people are clear on the idea that while the state number went down and our number went up, I would be willing to bet the vast majority of our students have that TTSD diploma, which is a higher level of credits than the state diploma. So we went up and with a higher standard.
Next slide. The other point I want to make is that when it comes to forecasting our graduation rates, the ninth grade on track is a greater predictor of our graduation rates than anything else. It is, in my opinion, one of the data points that shows all of the work from K to 8, getting students ready for ninth grade, as well as the work from 9th through 12th, making sure that they stay on track. So I am going to talk a little bit about the ninth grade on track number, and then we're going to also talk about the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade on track that we are also keeping an eye on, but that I don't have the predictive analysis yet to be able to show you. So I'm only going to be able to show you the ninth grade on track comparison. So if we go to the next slide, this is the movement of our ninth grade on track, which is the lighter color, light green versus light blue. And then that cohort's graduation 4 years later is the darker color. So the class of 2017, you can see that their graduation rate was pretty close to the ninth grade on track from 4 years later. When ninth grade on track went up, graduation rates went up 4 years later. When ninth grade went, when our graduation rates went down last year, it was predicted 4 years earlier by a drop in our ninth grade on track. And so again, this is the up and down of preparing students that occurs. And as I showed in the very first graph of this, there were times where our graduation rates did go down a little bit in that overall upward trend. The 2019-20 school year was one of those moments where it did go down in that overall upward trend. The one data point I do want to show, which is last year's ninth grade on track, which is the graduating class of 2024, is a lot lower. So last year's ninth grade students were on track at a lower rate than what we have seen in many years. And so the predictive nature of the ninth grade on track number is very important in that it's absent intervention. That without intervention, that is what's going to happen. That is the predicted outcome of that graduating class. And so, oh, I'm terribly sorry. And so a lot of the conversation is also going to be from our principals, the work that is being done to ensure that that is not as predictive as it normally is. And so that is a lot of the conversation.
So one note before we move to the next slide is one thing to know is during remote learning, when we moved to the 4x4, it didn't allow us to do our big cornerstone of ninth grade success work, which is the house model with the student success, where teachers are talking about common shared students using data to inform instructional moves. And absent of that, we saw a decline. When principals talk about their data, when you see that system back up and running now that we're back, you see that significant impact on the data. So again, I think it's important that when we know the why versus just we have no idea why that happened is really important to name. Next slide, please. So just one anchor reminder is our update on semester 1 is our goals. So by spring of 22, our goal is to increase ninth grade on track by 5% for all and 8% for our historically underserved populations. And for 10 through 12, it was to increase credit attainment by 5% for all and 8% for our historically underserved populations. Next slide, please. A couple caveats just to know is some grading policy shifts and clarification. So I'm sure you've heard of the no grade. And just to clarify what that means is it did replace Fs. It did not replace the fact that a student doesn't get credit. So students still have to retake the course to get the credit for graduation, but it doesn't have a negative impact to the GPA. And that was an intentional move given still our very intermittent quarantining, students missing classes was the reason we made that shift. But it doesn't forgo the credit. The other piece you'll see in the data is incompletes. So right now, both an incomplete and a no grade act like an F in the sense that it will show in the data as students not receiving credit. The I does allow students extra time with support to turn that I into a passing grade before the end of the year. So just want to note that that's out there. We'll provide another data point when those incompletes shift. Next slide, please. So next up, we have our Principal Bailey, who's going to add a little color to the data and be able to provide some stories of school.
No pressure. No, I think Paul and Amber have done a phenomenal job of laying some of the groundwork for this conversation. But one of the things that is a true highlight of this first data set is when you look at that 9th grade on track increase, our goal increase of 5% for all. In 2020, 2021, semester one, we were looking at 88%, one of the lowest 9th grade on track numbers that we've had since we started tracking that data. To see after semester one for this cohort an increase all the way up to 95%, not just back to where we were before the pandemic, but actually above that, speaks volumes to our teachers and their collaborative efforts and their teaming approach. As Amber mentioned, in shifting to that 4x4 model and losing that freshman house model and that teacher collaboration to really talk about kids and their needs and to work towards them, we saw that shift. And so super proud of the work of our teachers relative to that. The area of growth for us is with that lack of the freshman house model last year during CDL, our efforts to get our kids back on track to graduate, and the conversations that we had last summer about summer programming and the work that the credits that we were able to attain during summer programming, the work that we're trying to do around relationship and rebuilding that culture and that climate of excellence at Tigard High School for our students that are back with us now. There's work to be done, and there's going to be ongoing work to fight the predictive nature of that 9th grade on track data that we see so that we can get that cohort with an 88% on track rate back up to mid 90s or above by the time they graduate and we can get them across the stage. So there's a lot of success in this slide and in this data, but there is a lot of work that needs to happen to overcome the challenges that we've all faced. And I think one of the pieces to point, and this was mentioned earlier, but you can see it live in this data, this semester one data in that far right column, that includes incompletes. And so that piece that we're not able to articulate very clearly right now is how many of those who have not yet earned credit for their classes in first semester are currently partnering with their teachers to shift an incomplete into a credit attaining passing grade. And so that is work that is ongoing through our coaches, through our teachers, through ongoing partnerships with the kids to say, hey, there are a couple of standards that need to be met before we feel comfortable awarding you a credit earning grade for that class. So to those, again, we talked about this and I won't beat this horse, but to those who say we've lowered standards, I would challenge that we're being more flexible in how we work with kids to meet those standards, but the level of those standards have not changed one iota.
So can I just clarify what you're saying? So the 88% in the second column, if a student has an incomplete, that is not represented in that 8%.
Correct. That 88% is students who have done the work, demonstrated their content knowledge or skills in order to earn that credit. If they are still in progress, they are showing up as no credit right now.
Got it.
Next slide. So again, you'll see some of the same information. This is relative to our underserved student populations, and you'll see some of the very similar trends. Again, a huge point of pride for our 9th graders. Our 9th grade students who are historically underserved have gone from 76% to 92%, which is an amazing number in and of itself. And yet that work remains for our 10th, 11th, and 12th graders in order to get them across that stage when their time is due. So that work, again, is ongoing. We were fortunate to have some financial supports through COVID relief to support some summer work last year that we are currently in conversation about how do we replicate as best we can the efforts that were taken last summer, because the number of credits that were earned by our students was unbelievable. And without that same funding source, we're having to get a lot more creative on how we do that, but we saw the benefit not only for our students who are recovering credit, but also for some of our students who are exploring some more rigorous course loads. So we're excited to continue that planning so that we can continue to get the numbers that we're hoping for.
I appreciate you talking about that intervention, which is what I was referring to earlier, that the credit recovery work. Are there other ways that you could intervene and say, for these 10th graders, so that's 78%, it's concerning. So what other things can be done to ensure that by the time they graduate, get up to that 95% or 92% or more?
Well, I appreciate that. I'll add a caveat to that this is not 100% an apples to apples comparison. And that when we look at our cohorts, we have students who have moved out of TTSD since they were with us last year. We have new students that have moved into us. So we're bringing their lived experiences from a prior school or school district. We have some students that have moved out. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but those are the bodies that we have in our building right now. And that's all that really matters to me. And so that 78%, there's a lot of work that has to happen. So we are in the middle of forecasting right now. So forecasting will encompass work with our counselors to identify where are the gaps in their credit attainment that they can forecast for into their schedule for next year. What are the options that we have for credit recovery during the school year, which we're expanding some of that work that we're doing. How do we expand the summer credit recovery? Where are those other options where we can create opportunities for our students to demonstrate the knowledge and skills relative to the standards? And it honestly, this is where the closer that you get to that senior year, it becomes more and more individualized based on student needs, student experience, and student living, like their circumstances and how we can work with them.
Before I pass this over to Director Fields, I want, today we learned in a update from COSA that the legislature is likely to provide $100 million across the state relative to extended learning opportunities in summer. And this year, unlike last year, that will extend all the way out to January 1st of 2023. So specifically for high school students, to this point, you can certainly start some work relative, as we did last year, around credit recovery and credit completion, but extend that work and additional supports, in an after school or Saturday or whatever, using those dollars through the entire fall to continue to add one more layer of intervention. Vice Chair Lynn, to your question.
And before I pass to Principal Delerva, I want to just also add a reminder about the MTSS process, and that these schools are pulling their data every 2 weeks, know where students are then assessing what those needs are and responding, and whether that's Check and Connect, whether that's ACSEM. I won't go through all the list of things, but there's a lot of immediate response every 2 weeks. That's happening as well from the on-track coordinators and counselors, administrators working together around that data. So just that there is that, not the, oh my gosh, this is what happened at semester, but there's the knowledge in between and intervention and support happening. So next up, we have Tualatin.
I think Director Urban had a question.
I just wanted to clarify that similar to the last slide, are the numbers still, and we see those drops from the historically underserved populations, that those are still including the incompletes, correct? In the,
correct.
So same
Yes.
as the previous slide. So
Correct.
while there is still a discrepancy there and a drop, that is a fluid number because it's not including the ones that currently work on the spreads.
Right.
So it could potentially be there.
And looking at the 78%, so the 22% that are off track, that does include students that just need the right credits. They still can get to 24 by the end of their senior year. They just need to pick the right credits. It also includes those who need credit recovery, but it does include those like Principal Bailey was talking about, are those that where it's forecasting their next class, what they need to take. So those are the two avenues, is the recovery, but as well as picking the right credits.
Brian talked a lot, so I'll try not to be redundant. Where was Jill's timer when Brian was talking? I won't repeat a lot of the things Brian mentioned because it's true for both comprehensive high schools. But I think when you look at our data, we're obviously also very proud of the work in our 9th grade. And it shows just how important those house structures and student success team meetings are. One of the things we're talking about at Tualatin High School is scaling houses up to 10th grade next year. It's still a decision we have to make as an instructional leadership team in our Cal leaders team, our department leaders team, but it's certainly something we're thinking about as we build the master schedule. I also think about all of the work done by intervention, which Dr. Lynn highlighted. For us at Tualatin High School, that meant we took an entire week before finals and asked teachers to identify, teachers voted on, we just want to identify 1 or 2 class periods per course where we're just going to give students that time. We asked them to report that back to us, to give us, what dates those were. So we had a master spreadsheet, and students had time to kind of make up some of their courses. A lot of that came from feedback we heard at this very board meeting around stress around tests coming up, especially transitioning back from being out of the building. So I think it's responsiveness on the part of our staff and our re-engagement teams, our dean of students, our people who are reaching out to those that haven't been coming to school traditionally and trying to help them recover some credit on top of our tiered programs. So I think it's the work of a village in bringing those students back, but our staff's commitment to building more intervention opportunity is one of the most encouraging pieces I've seen come out of COVID as a lasting change. That also speaks to the grading policy changes. I think we can't overstate the importance of having an incomplete as a usable option for teachers. Before the pandemic, that was not something that was used very frequently, and now I see teachers much more comfortable to use that. That requires them to put their own time in, to often chase kids down and see where that complete is finished, to have conversations and to do the things that teachers already do above and beyond what they've already overcommitted themselves on in their daily lives is something that I think is really can be highlighted. And so I think that shows up in a lot of ways in our data and with similar data points. Tigard, you want to go to the next slide, Amber? So I wanted to speak specifically a little to our growth in this area. Obviously very proud again of our jump with our historically underserved students in 9th grade. This has been the focus of a lot of our work this year. We had 2 school goals this year in our SIP, and I'll have a chance to talk to you about that in our next board meeting. But one of our focus is on scaffolding for multilingual learners. And I think we're seeing some of that play out in scaffold instruction in classrooms. And I know that is something we're just starting this year and something we're looking to improve upon in the future. But I'm hopeful to see our numbers increase with all groups of underserved students. But specifically, we've really struggled in our data at Tualatin High School with our emerging bilingual learners, emerging language learners. And so that's been a professional development focus for us.
Next slide, please. Try to get the opportunity to tee up this wonderful human next to me. But one thing we did this year was focus on Creekside Community High School's goals and allow it to be differentiated, because the fluidity and the community that they're serving, they've often just been tucked into the work of the comprehensives and the goals of the comprehensive, but making it very responsive to Creekside as a school was really important. So the first goal for Creekside was to increase the percentage of full year students who earn credit at an on-track rate by 8% as compared to the previous year. And then secondly, the increase in the average amount of credit earned by a student in a year as compared to the previous year. So those are the 2 goals that Principal Romas will be speaking to next.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you this evening. Good to be here with you. As you can see here from our slide, I think we set our goals a little too low. And really just, big shout out to the staff and especially the teachers of Creekside who pour so much love and effort and care and kindness and creativity into each student that we have the pleasure to work with to get these kind of results. So I would say that part of our story is that we opened in 2019, and at that time we had remixed some alternative programming in the district and brought it together into a beautiful new building at the campus of Creekside with a new vision, a new idea, and really bringing some kids together to do something special. And with that, we really first and foremost try to see to the social and emotional environment and landscape of our school. And that allows people to stay stay whole and to stay focused on learning rather than to be distracted by their emotions and by this and that that's going on all the time in their very complicated lives. I think that approach, and in working with our students and families and staff as a community to, from the ground up, redesign what high school can look like, with students working with the greatest obstacles in mind. And what we've done is to come up with a kind of a slogan that we live by every day, which is success, growth, or a new plan for every student all the time, for all staff members, how we live our personal lives, if you will, and also the systems that we run our school by. So that approach of constant root cause analysis and redesign and refinement of what we do has really, leads to some great outcomes. I think that this year, the ones that I would love to highlight that you'll hear about in our SIP plan are about, one thing is we call it the community support network, the way that we organize school and systematize relationship becomes really important. One example of that is our counselors' caseload is organized by advisory class, and our advisors work with our students on a one-on-one daily basis in a class period designed for this and checking with their parents on a weekly basis. And then they can partner through this way of envisioning how relationships can be centered. And so we've got all kinds of examples of that. We do the same thing with our special education teachers. I meet with my teachers every week to check in on them and give them feedback and problem solve with them. So we're working at a very personal level, but creating time and spaces for each of those interactions to happen in a good way. So in addition to that, we're doing some intentional work around what we call early indicators data, which is not just to wait till the end of the term to do a postmortem on how students did, but we're doing that on a weekly basis with attendance percentages. We're doing that with the level of relationship that each of our students have with our staff members. We are looking at positive youth development surveys to help so we can understand which experiences at school our students are growing from, not only in an academic sense, but also in that personal growth, agency building, and finding their path in the world kind of a sense. So we're really trying to go for something beyond just graduation, but really to empower these kids and give them an opportunity to help define what school looks like for them, so we can do it even better. So thanks.
And just one note, he's very humble about this, but this is the first 9th grade class at Creekside, which is a really exciting thing, that it's not just students transferring over in that 11th and 12th grade, but actually if we start from the beginning and bring them into the Creekside community, what that looks like on the other end, which is really exciting. So we'll pause here, and any additional questions for the team?
Well, what great validation of the Creekside vision and approach to, it took vision and foresight to build that school, and it's shown up in the numbers. Vice Chairman, were you going for your mic?
Well, I was just gonna ask, I was looking at the attendance data too, and wondering to what extent there is a link between chronic absenteeism and credit attainment. It's obvious to me, but I'd love to hear.
I think you have to really dig down to the why on each individual kid. This is something that I know Creekside really prides himself on, but we also do at 12th high school. And that's what our tier 3 and tier 2 teams are doing. I think the other big step we took was just a few years ago in trying to decriminalize our attendance process and response. And that led to the birth of LIFT. It led to the birth of our re-engagement specialist positions that were created from the district. At one point, we took the money we were spending on truancy courts in this district and reinvested in a partnership with AmeriCorps, and that led to the creation of re-engagement specialist positions who are really doing the case management work of helping get kids back to school. So I think it's, to answer your question, it's taking a different approach to trying to hear the stories around why kids aren't coming and to match them with the appropriate partnerships, relationships, goal setting or academic program or tiered intervention.
I can just add,
just to add briefly too, I think I would add to that, there's an absolute correlation between attendance and achievement, but that only truly exists when we're looking at what we're assessing, how we're assessing it, and how we're grading what a student knows and can do. And that moving away from more of our traditional grading schemes of, if you're there and you do this assignment, you get credit, rather than, do you know the content? Are you able to utilize the skills that are necessary to meet the standards? That's an overwhelming part of this work and this kind of transformational leadership relative to attendance, achievement, credit attainment, and so forth.
Question. Oh.
So it's at this point that I have the distinct privilege and honor to award 3 Golden Hedgehog Awards, one to each of our high schools for their outstanding work relative to the 2021 cohort and ongoing work relative to the 22 four-year cohort. So with that, Principal Romas. Principal Bailey. And last, but certainly not least, Principal DeLorba. And a significant shout out to Director Fields for her continued work and driving force. All of this in the midst of a pandemic. I think that speaks clearly to this board's commitment, to the district's commitment to our primary mission, which is educating all children and closing those achievement gaps for those who have been historically underserved and are now starting to make the movement. So with that, we thank you for the opportunity to share this good work with you this evening.
Okay. So with that, I usually try to do breaks at 90 minutes. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess and we will reconvene at 8:13. Convene our meeting at 8:14. All right, everyone, we're going to reconvene the meeting.
You're good.
Okay, with that, we are going to move to our second report and discussion item, summary of culturally and community responsive education framework look-fors with presenter Dr. Lisa McCall. Dr. McCall.
Welcome and good evening, Board Chair Bowman, Vice Chair Dr. Lynn, Board Directors, and student reps. It is my pleasure to be here to introduce work that some of our building leaders have done around aligning our TTSD approved priority teacher and administrative standards, evaluation standards, to our culturally and community responsive education framework. So the purpose of this presentation is to share with you how our building principals and staff have worked collaboratively to develop observable look-fors that are aligned to the framework based on the priorities. So I have with me here tonight is Principal Andrew Curl from Tualatin Middle School and Ryan Blasquez, principal of CFT, along with two of his staff. So next slide. Just to give you a little timeline, Principal Curl back in 2017 and through 2018 with his team developed a Google Classroom process for collaboration around supervision. And then during a pandemic, we had approved teacher standards that were developed in partnership with our association, TTEA. And then this past August, our priority standards, we intentionally aligned them to our CCRE framework that we introduced to administrators back in August. And again, if you think about what Dr. Sue shared at our work session around a strategic plan, where we're going, is putting an emphasis on that culturally and community responsive education framework. And we know that we cannot do this work alone. So in collaboration with staff, principals have been able to, during this time, work with their staff and developing some look-fors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Principal Curl.
All right, thank you, Dr. McCall, and thank you, board members, for having us. I'm really excited to be here to talk about instruction. It's my favorite thing, and I feel like we haven't been able to do that a lot lately, so I'm very excited to come and talk about that today. So, you know, at Tualatin, we were really excited to see a couple things happen. And, you know, there was some glass half full moments of the pandemic, and one of those things was really thinking about how we were providing feedback to teachers. I always think about this, the metaphor of kind of getting a student getting an essay back and having it be covered in red writing to the point where they don't actually find any meaning out of it. And I felt like that's what we were sort of doing with 30-something standards for our instructional framework. So really paring them down and having a really clear focus, I think helped just me as a leader have a really through thread, and also as we're talking to colleagues across our system. So one of the things that I wanted to do once we had these pared down standards is we had 8. And so when I met with my instructional leadership team, we wanted to spend August really going through there and going through each of the standards we were focusing on, and creating sort of co-constructing look-fors with our staff as opposed to our staff, for what we thought good instruction looked like in the classroom. So we did sort of a gallery walk in groups where staff members got together. They looked at each standard. So for example, a 3.5 standard would be teacher establishes an environment that promotes respect and supports individual student differences such as race, gender, ability, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. Like that's one of our standards. So if I were to go into a classroom and see that, what would that actually look like? And so our teachers had some time together to grapple with that, and they created, you know, you might see involving student voice and choice in the classroom. You might see communal learning protocols, call and response. Student work is displayed. So as some examples of what they identified. And once we did that, we put that all together into a draft and we shared that with staff as part of our observation tool for this school year. And so as we're going into classrooms, we're highlighting those things, providing comments on those things. And it's really a collaborative back and forth conversation about the look forwards that we developed together. So you can go to the next slide, please. So this is sort of our opening August. I just wanted to show kind of the process where we came up with some general ideas and we did some sticky notes and kind of went through this whole process together as we co-constructed the look forwards for our framework. Next slide. So from the summer work we did, obviously this year has gone differently than we maybe would have thought. But we wanted to make sure that we were putting this work in front of us. So we started in August. So our instructional leadership team, which we sort of melted together with our staff equity pillar, spent a lot of time refining the look forwards that our staff came up with at the beginning of the year. And some of what we're doing in our staff meetings together is we're now using this framework to look at specific standards. So in February, for example, our staff got together and we showed a classroom video that we were all looking at in small breakout groups. And we used that tool to look at the instruction that we're seeing in the classroom and did some reflections together as a team. And so teachers were looking at things that they were really feeling confident about, that they were glowing about, and things that they wanted to grow on, specifically to 3.5 and 3.6 standards. And that's kind of how we're structuring a lot of our instructional time with our staff, is really looking at instruction and kind of evaluating it together. Next slide. So for example, this was at the end of that, these are things that our teachers really wanted to say, you know, this is things we're doing well, so I'm an expert at, that I might be able to step up and support some of our staff development with. And there's also things that they really wanted to work on. So not opting out in the classroom is something that they identified as, you know, how can I get better at making sure that every kid does everything in my classroom? So that's going to be a natural next step as we think about looking at our formative assessment standards at our following staff meetings. But we spent a lot of time in SEL and building relationships in our community during COVID. So this idea of being a warm demander has really shown up in the way our teachers are teaching this year. So that is the work that we're sort of doing at Quality, and it's really fun. I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Blasquez.
Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Blasquez, principal at CFT Elementary School. These are my esteemed colleagues. Colleague Gooding, who's a 5th grade teacher at CFT. I believe this is also her 7th year. And we have Katie Perry, who is an outstanding learning specialist at Charles F. Tigard Elementary. So I'll avoid some redundancies here and get to the point where you can ask us some questions, but we followed a really similar path to Quality. We kind of became versed as an admin team during our August pre-service around the CCRE framework, started thinking about ways to tie it to the work we've already done so we can build and connect that back to our buildings and back to instructional practices. And in August, our instructional leadership team, which these two are an integral part of, we dug into the value of collective efficacy, how we were going to structure our professional development and it to be collaboration time, how we were going to use that to calibrate around the look-fors and high leverage things we've already identified based on what our families have told us and users in our system have told us, things we know have worked in the past as we think together as a team. And then we knew it would be really important to recognize CCRE as something that we are connecting to, not something we are adding on. You know, that we have these priority standards and that CCRE really gives us these 3 tenets to kind of think through. And so we broke that down with our staff in these different ways. Kali will share how she worked with equity team members to kind of introduce this idea of critical consciousness and why that matters. Katie will talk about how we got the standards up in front of teams, much like Andrew did, and identified the key look-fors in congruent instructional practices, which is the second tenet. And then our equity team has partnered with our PBIS team as a move to get towards that climate and culture that is humanizing. And how do we always think through an equity lens with any problem of practice that we have? So I'll let these two talk a little about what they were able to do with our team at the October PD.
The stepping stones one?
That's okay, I can still talk about it. Okay. So I had gone with our FPA and we had gone to the equity retreat, and Zinnia had led us through an activity called Stepping Stones, where you get to map your experiences and your background, how you got to being an educator. So we wanted to do that. It was really powerful. And we wanted to do that with our staff and really center ourselves on the why before we, got to business. And so we led them through the activity and everyone got to share. And it really, opened the dialogue. We could look at our personal efficacy before beginning to talk about our collective efficacy in later meetings. So it just began that. It was a great beginning of year activity to start those conversations with each other and have that shared experience with each other.
And then, like Ryan was saying, we wanted this to be not something that we're just adding on, because teachers already at the beginning of this year were feeling like really fairly overwhelmed with coming back to buildings. So we wanted them to understand that this was something that you're already doing, and that these look-fors, these things that Ryan was going to come in and check off boxes on, are not arbitrary. Oh, it feels welcoming in here. So we had each grade level team and specialist team sit down and have one of the standards, and that they kind of owned. And like in good instructional, yes, next slide. Nope. There we go. Like solid instructional practices, we have our student-friendly learning targets that we put out so that everybody has a common understanding of what we're going for. Similar idea, we had the teachers look through. Some of these were easy to understand, others were really lengthy and wordy, and it just felt like another thing. So we had them rewrite it if it needed it. And then they had ownership of creating Post-its on this Jamboard of things that they do that meet that standard already. And so they were in charge of their standard that their grade level team was assigned, and then they were encouraged to add to other ones. And everybody then had access to this Jamboard, and they could go through whenever they were going to be evaluated, or if they were struggling with something and were getting feedback about it, they could come back and say, oh, here's an instructional practice that I already know how to do, that I can use to meet that standard and move students forward. So.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here today. So I think next slide. Thank you very much. All right, so following our October PD, like Andrew had referenced, we had big plans on how we were going to meet and collaborate and do this work in an ongoing way. To do this work right, it has to be a conversation that kind of never stops. But we ended up finalizing our rubric for CFT, sharing that out, and we have a process of really transparent kind of observation and supervision that, all the stuff's linked in this slide deck if you're interested. And then as a team of 10 elementary schools, we also kind of calibrated for a big 3 for each standard. So Dr. McCall and Dr. Sue and anybody who wanted to come in and take stock could see or could look to see some of those high leverage things happen in our building for each of the standards. Next slide. I think so kind of the closing, I want to share my, and I believe many of my colleagues, kind of perspectives on a couple of things around CCRE is that, being really intentional about seeking out culturally and community responsive education skills within our standards is incredibly important. And rolling it out in August in the winter here as we've gone has been tough, because we really, I think through our work that Kali led, and we talked a lot about that critical consciousness, it happens in community, kind of with your community. That's how you calibrate your critical consciousness within our school. And shared understanding takes some shared time, and that's been at a premium. And so I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that, some of that, along with kind of the capacity of our workforce, has impacted our ability to sustain this the right way, but we'll get there. So that's one.
Thank you, team. And just to also sum it up, this is a prime example of that collective efficacy, recognizing that when groups of people get together with a shared belief and the capability to execute actions based on that shared belief, then the outcomes are going to benefit our students. And I really want to stress that all of our leaders during this time of navigating our current reality and still keeping the focus on student achievement in community, knowing that they cannot do this work alone, and they need the support of the staff who are working together and that shared decision-making, because it should never be a surprise when an administrator goes into a classroom. And here you have heard from two of our leaders who's saying there isn't surprises that this work has been done together. With that, that concludes our portion. Is there any questions for the team?
Well, thank you very much for the presentation and for being here. Board members, questions? Please, Director Urban.
So I just want to say how much I love the framework of this. I love the look fors, and I think, you know, as an educator, as many of us are, we've seen sort of like these standards, and like you said, it's like word salad, and you don't have any connection to it. And so I think the way that both schools have come together and district-wide to kind of find those look fors, what's inherently there is the values of our district too. So you're looking at greeting students and those shared lived experiences and those different lived experiences, and you know, saying names correctly and asking for correction. I mean, all of those things that are in there that are super tangible and super easy when you're coming in and thinking like, how do I make this? And I can read the standard and it's very confusing. It's like, oh, it's those things that we all want to be doing anyway. And so the whole thing, I looked through it, and it was neat to see those look fors sort of so translated into, I think, what so many of our district values and sort of those pillars are. And they're just those sort of what seem like those basic everyday things, but they make the world of difference. So awesome.
And I just wanted to say how grateful I am that you introduced this as you're already doing this, and here are the ways in which you're already doing it, rather than here's something else for you to fold into your classroom practice. Makes all the difference. And it's then not surprising that staff are like, oh yeah, and my colleagues are doing it this way. And I mean, that Jamboard is just the best, because it's like, oh yeah, I never thought if I could do it that way too. It's awesome. So thank you so much. This was brilliant.
Yeah, Vice Chair Lynn.
Yeah, I really, you know, you said that you were excited that we were talking about instruction. And yeah, okay, you were sitting over here when you said it. But me too. I mean, I'm just so glad to hear and to see this framework applied to actual teaching. Because I think, you know, I'm biased. I think that's where it actually counts, is in the classroom. And we don't have nearly enough conversation about what teachers are actually doing. And we don't have enough tools that teachers can actually use to apply to their work in context. And this is a good example of one that people can actually use to actually improve what they're doing, to better connect with kids. Thank you.
I do have a question on the abbreviated standards that were developed. How were those communicated? How were and are those
communicated to the classroom teachers, and how, you know, given that we're just in the second year of the abbreviated standards, how would you describe the fluency of educators say, oh yeah, I know exactly what the standards are? Is that in progress, or do you think we're there? So yeah, communication to teachers, and then to like, how aware are the educators?
All right, I'll take a attempt at that question. I think, you know, coming back from the pandemic, the way I presented it to staff was about, you know, this is kind of where we need to start coming back from a pandemic, is we need to know what our kids are learning. And that seemed like a really logical place to focus our standards and our time, because we don't know what they know. And we really need to get to the bottom of that so we can move forward. So in terms of formative assessment and really narrowing in on that, it made a ton of sense, and it was a really easy sell. At Tualatin, prior to, even during the pandemic, we were doing a book study with our staff around Zerpa Hammond's culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And so it was a natural place for us to start. Is like, now that we've done that work and we've built some collective, muscle around what that means, what does it actually look like in practice in the classroom, and how can we develop that collectively? And so that's sort of how I rolled it out. And I think was a good decision for focus on those 8 standards.
Yes, and I think, a model that Andrew piloted and we started having conversations about a few years back, I don't know how many now, was not having supervision and evaluation being this kind of pulling back the curtain at the end of the year and saying, here's how you did. And so having working documents with these rubrics within this Google Classroom, which I think Dr. McCall referenced from one of the earlier slides, every time I step into a classroom, we have the look fors identified, we're commenting on whether we saw them or where we saw them, and then teachers are able to leave comments about, oh yeah, you should come tomorrow at 1:30 because that's when I'm going, okay, great. And so it's more like this running record conversation we're having about the standards, which makes them live and breathe a little differently. I think, and so much like Andrew, when we came back, those were just the 8 that we had landed on. And then this year we shifted to look through that CCRE lens a little differently, but they were the same standards, I believe, close. Yes, they were. And so we had already built some muscle around it. Anything to add?
I just want to add that, yeah, I think that that was our biggest kind of thing, is we wanted teachers to feel like this isn't something extremely new, that these are things that are just best practices. We just need to remember to use them, add them into our practices, anytime we can. So I think that at our school, it was just kind of, reiterating the things that we've been talking about for the last couple years. So
I love the description of the running conversation. That helps me understand it a little different. Yeah, Vice Chair Lynn.
Is this being used district-wide?
Yes, I'll just add, back in August, we, or prior to August, as a cabinet and a mini cabinet, we also, we want to make sure that we're not just bringing to our leaders something that we haven't also sat down to calibrate what it looks like, those observable look fors. So we did that work. Then we brought it to our district, to our administrators. They also had opportunities to get together and say, and calibrate observable look fors, and then they brought it to their staff. This year we started with the new leaders as well, and we also brought that to them. Back in October, when we had our PD, we had all of our TOSAs get together also to calibrate observable look fors. So that's an example of aligning the system. And as Dr. Sue pointed out, like where we're going, we still have more work to do, but I really want to commend on all levels doing this work in a way that's intentional, that's going to produce, again, those outcomes that we want for students.
Right. Any final questions or comments? Thank you all again for being here this evening. With that, we'll move on to our third report and discussion item, TAG Services Update with Melissa Baran. Hello, hello. Welcome back.
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here. And I'm excited that I have the opportunity to speak with you tonight about an update on our TAG services. And so, as you know, my name is Melissa Baran. I'm the Associate Director of Teaching and Learning and have the privilege of working with our TAG services, TAG coordinators, and TAG specialists. Tonight, I'm just going to give you kind of a progress update because we are about halfway through our implementation of our TAG plan. And so this TAG plan was adopted in 2020, the 2020-21 school year, and is set to expire, if you will, in the 2022-23 school year. And so this is, again, just a progress update of where we are based off of the goals that we've established for providing services to our TAG students. Next slide, please. Linked in the board packet and the agenda, you will see just a link directly to the TAG plan just for your reference so that you can see all of the things that we are working to implement this current school year and next year. Next slide, please. So the way that I've organized this update is just kind of giving you the goals that were outlined in the plan. And then on the left side of each slide is the actions that we have taken so far. And then on the right side is the next steps that we are at with the district. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking through the actions taken because I'm a learner and we're all learners. And really what I want to focus on is where we're going next. And so I'm going to spend the bulk of the time talking about the next steps for us in terms of how we are implementing and moving toward meeting our goals. One of the things I want to make sure that you all are aware of, as well as our community and everyone, is that we fully recognize that this is a plan in progress. We have not met the goals that we have set out yet. And that is hard. That is hard for me as a perfectionist and somebody who really wants to be providing the best possible services for all of our students to admit. But that is the truth. And we are working, and as we all know, in these uncharted territories, unknown circumstances, and it's affecting our tag specialists and tag services in a very unique way, in that our TOSAs and our tag specialists have been subbing. Since November, they have been part of the sub force that is serving in across all of our buildings to keep our buildings open. And so as a result of that, some of these wonderful plans that we had in place of training teachers and providing direct services to teacher teams in buildings has not occurred yet. And I just think that that's really important for everyone to understand, that it isn't a lack of obviously will or desire or any of those things. It's just that right now our number one priority is keeping our schools open. And we are all on the same page. We are all, I have been subbing in buildings as well. And so we are all doing that in order to keep our students in school. But that is the reality. And so I think it's important for the record for all of us to be honest about that conversation, that we understand that that is what is going on. So here we go. Here's the update. Our first goal is to increase staff awareness of the characteristics of giftedness and strategies of differentiation that will support all of our students in heterogeneous classrooms. And it's nice to follow the conversation about our CCRE, because that's one of the major tenets, is that our students are being served in heterogeneous classrooms. And as such, we need all of our teachers to be very familiar with differentiation strategies. Where we're at right now is that we recognize we need to create a better plan for professional development. And we, again, had wonderful plans of training teachers and pulling teachers from buildings to be able to receive that direct training. That hasn't happened yet. And so that is on our next steps, is finalize what is professional learning going to look like for the remainder of our teaching staff around those specific teaching strategies. What's happening right now is that our instructional support staff, so our instructional coaches, our literacy specialists, our deans, our assistant principals, have all been trained in differentiation, and they are working directly with teacher teams at each individual building, but it's not in a systematized way. And we recognize that there are some gaps with that we want to make sure that we are operating in a more systematized way, as opposed to the when it's convenient or when I can, I'm able to work with those directly with teachers. The other next step that I want to emphasize and focus on is around refining our communication. And so one of the things that we've gotten a lot of feedback from various stakeholder groups is around our misses in communication with families, with students, with teachers, around how tag services are being provided and what those look like specifically in classrooms. And so we are working as a team and teaching and learning to really refine communication so that everybody is doing the same thing. We're using similar email templates. We're making similar phone calls with similar information across our system, again, so that it's not dependent on who has access to a particular staff member or adult in the system. It's really just about, because we're Tigard-Tualatin School District, this is how we provide services and this is what it looks like. Next slide, please. Our second goal was at the K-6 level. Up until 2020, the 2020-21 school year, tag services were provided in a pull-out method. And so students were removed from their individual elementary classrooms and received tag services outside of the heterogeneous classroom. And so we worked to shift that in order to be aligned with the ODE tag mandates. And so we've done that. And again, our instructional specialists are working directly with teacher teams. And this is where our elementary tag specialists have really taken on the bulk of that work and are doing that when they are not subbing. Again, same next step as the previous goal is just around finalizing our schedule for professional learning so that, again, all staff have the opportunity to be trained. Next slide, please. Our third goal is one that I am very excited about, and I just do want to highlight one of the best things that has happened so far in our tag services is around reducing the disparity that exists between the identification of our tag students amongst our underserved populations. And so, as we know, our data historically has shown that the majority of our tag students that we've identified in our system have been white. And so our team has been really intentional about identifying and reaching out to our underserved populations to identify them for tag, including hosting an affinity group family night with our African American Black families that we invited directly to talk with us about how tag services are provided in the district, but more importantly, what giftedness looks like for students who are Black and African American. And it was very well attended. And as a result of that, we were able to identify more students for tag services. And so that is something to celebrate as a district, that we, since the implementation of this plan, are upwards of identifying 25 or 30 students from our historically underserved populations for tag. And so that is something really to celebrate and something I'm very proud of the team for the work that they've done there.
Can you say
Yes.
those numbers one more time? I missed them.
It's between 25 and 30. We have 4 that are in process still. And so it's
Great.
right between 25 and 30.
Great, thank you.
Of
That's
course.
Great news.
In terms of our next steps, we want to continue reaching out to our affinity groups and schedule more opportunities to meet with families, because we really did find a lot of success working in partnership with our family advocates and the Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion. And so we want to be more intentional about having more of those opportunities for families to ask us questions. The state has just adopted new OARs, so administrative regulations around tag. And so those have shifted a little bit. And so we're working on how that's going to impact our identification process. And then again, just having more targeted outreach. And like with anything in education, the more opportunity that we can have those one-on-one conversations, individual conversations, the better off it goes. Next slide, please. Our next goal is around increasing collaboration between our specialists and our content level teams. And so again, it goes back to this idea of making sure that our classroom teachers really understand what it means to provide tag services and differentiation for rate and level for all of our students. And so we've shifted how we've served our elementary students. We're working to do the same for our secondary students. But again, everything is coming back to this opportunity of figuring out how we're best going to support our teachers in the classrooms every day to be able to provide these services. And so we are continuously, I'm meeting at least every other week, sometimes more, with our tag specialists and tag coordinators at all the levels to figure out what that might look like at the building level, as well as bringing building leaders into this conversation. Next slide. The next one is around our resources as a district and how we really want to utilize the adults in the system and aligning what their roles are at each level. And so one of the things that came up when the district did the audit of tag services collectively was that at the elementary level, there were some pretty good systems in place, and there was tag specialists specifically assigned to elementary buildings, and that was a really positive experience. At our secondary level, it came to light that it wasn't as systematized. Again, that our 612 students and the experience that our students at the middle school and high school were having in terms of how they were receiving tag services was not equitable, was not as clearly defined, any of those sorts of things. And so that is something that we are currently working on. And again, you see that in the next steps, that we are working to refine our tag coordinator job descriptions and expectations. Again, moving towards this system approach, really trying to make sure that it's not just dependent on one person or who you have in a building or who you don't have in a building, so that it doesn't impact the services that are provided. And so that's a really big step for us, is really honing in on what those job descriptions are going to look like and how we're going to support the system as a whole. The other big step for me personally is just having more conversation with our building leaders so that we are all on the same page of what tag services are and are not. So that we, in having conversations with our stakeholder groups, groups. I obviously cannot have conversation. I mean, I guess I could if that's all I was going to do, but have conversations with everybody that has questions about tech services. And so I want to be in partnership with our building leaders around what that looks like so that they are also able to engage in those conversations in a really positive way and honoring where our students and families are coming from and being able to answer questions about what is going on with our tech services. Next slide. And our last goal is really about engaging our stakeholder groups in conversation and utilizing technology that we learned a lot during CDL. And so let's take that forward in how we reach out and invite opportunities for feedback from our stakeholder groups. And so it's really about how are we going to continue to hold virtual community meetings and how are we going to continue to hold opportunities for direct feedback and direct conversation with myself and the rest of the tech services team. It's also us utilizing iReady. iReady is just an amazing tool, and you heard about it earlier tonight about how it is such a great measure of students at an individual level. And so we are working with our teachers and our staffs to really understand how that can provide tech services. It really does a wonderful job of diagnosing where exactly a student is. And so a lot of that work can be utilized. So we're already giving the assessment, and so let's utilize it to make sure that we're diagnosing and prescribing in the appropriate way. Last slide. Questions? Any questions for me?
Director Irvin.
This was fantastic, and thank you for sort of setting up those goals like that. And it really does help to see sort of just right away what those next steps are. I was curious for the, looking at the, institutionally underserved populations, are there specific steps, or what are the specific steps the TAG coordinators and teachers are taking to kind of use that culturally responsive lens in identifying TAG students that are institutionally underserved or diverse language learners?
I can't give you a specific answer because it looks different in each building, really, and with each TAG specialist. And so the TAG specialists at the elementary level are first relying on the universal screener and then honing in on, based off of what this universal screener is, how can I then engage in those conversations? We've also shifted our identification process from purely the universal screener to then also looking at collective student portfolios, if you will. And so that is happening. Our team has just been really solid in terms of how we know that this is a priority for us. And so what our tech specialists are also doing is seeking out and looking at data and saying, okay, here are the students that maybe are on a bubble based off of the universal screener, but let's pull out more data to see if we can have them meet the criteria based off of that. And so sort of specific, I suppose, but also very individualized based off of building.
I just want to say thank you for your candor about the challenges you've had this year. I appreciate that. It is always useful for us to hear, what has gotten lost in the shuffle, because it has been quite a year. One thing I wanted to ask, when you mentioned the 25 to 30 students from the historically underserved, were any of those special ed students?
Ooh, I'm not sure, but I could get the answer for you. Yeah.
Vice Chair Lynn.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I've had the opportunity to be involved a little bit with this work and just learning a lot, and appreciate, I think, the goals and the sort of action steps and next steps that you're taking. And they address a lot of the questions that I've had, as I've engaged in this work with you. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for engaging and in having the conversation.
So my question is, first, thank you for the presentation. This was really helpful and interesting. My question is, so I get two questions. First question is, what is the timeline for universal training in our system for goal number one, next steps? Do we have a sense of what the timeline is for that?
We have a sense that we will have a plan in place by the end of this year to train for starting next year. And if it was up to me, it would be as quickly as possible. And so we're hoping to train as many people as possible, as quickly as possible.
Great.
And so in the original plan, it was rolled out over, I think, 3 years of training. We're expediting.
Great. I will add my voice of support to your position.
Yes.
Sooner is better, just because, every year that goes by is a class of students that
Right.
won't have access to that. And then my next question, and this is perhaps a complicated one, but so after we've got our workforce trained on differentiation, rate and level, what is the process for monitoring implementation and, like ensuring that in practice this is actually taking place for these students? What does that look like?
Yeah, it is a complicated question, Chair. What I can tell you is that in terms of implementation fidelity of any system, we have to pay attention to it, right? Like that's the ultimate thing that has to happen. And with differentiation, is one of perhaps the most complex parts of education that there ever has been and that there ever will be. However, what we are looking at in teaching and learning is moving towards this model of professional development that involves instructional coaches and having people in building on the ground every day, interacting with teachers and being very clear and understanding what the expectations are around differentiation. And so this is a teaching priority. This is a priority out of teaching and learning in terms of strategy. And so we would expect that everybody in our system is monitoring implementation with fidelity.
That's great. And then the quick follow-up would be, is there training for like building level administrators that's specific to their role in implementation and observing and coaching?
Yes. And so that will be part of our summer work. This summer will be around training up all of our building leaders as well as our instructional support staff, everybody, so that we really all are on the same page and understanding around differentiation. One of the things I want to make sure that we also are really clear about is that differentiation isn't just a tag service, right? And that we are doing differentiation for all students because we know that all students deserve to have the education at their particular rate and level, regardless of they're identified as gifted or not yet identified as gifted, whether they have needs for language supports, whether they have needs for special education supports, any of those sorts of things. And so that's one of the parts of our culture that we really are going to lean into. And one of our beliefs as an educational system is that all students deserve this differentiation. And so it's a priority. We all are going to do this, and it's what's going to be best for all of our students.
I really appreciate your answers. Thank you. Vice Chair Lynn.
Yeah, in that regard, and I'm curious to hear if students have thoughts on this, because this will directly impact them. But we've talked about this issue of differentiation and the shift, right? And in the same vein that I think Ben was asking, I'm curious about, how do you kind of institute a culture change, because we're so used to our silos.
Do you want me to answer or do you want them to answer? Okay. I think a culture change begins with Dr. Sue, and it's not necessarily even a culture change, but it's a culture expectation. And she has been very clear. I've only been in the district for 9 months, and I am very clear about what the expectations are for teaching and learning, and for what needs to be occurring in each of our buildings in terms of how students are receiving instruction. And so I believe that the shift in culture is coming, and it will be a 3 to 5 year process, probably, because that's what adaptive change takes. But there's a very clear vision of who we will be as educators in the Tigard-Tualatin School District, and that comes from Dr. Sue's leadership.
So just to clarify, my interest for the students is not so much in that question, but around, what do you think about this idea of the differentiated classroom, where you have maybe more of a mixture of kids of different abilities all together, rather than, sort of separated into different groups?
I think that's been like the separated in different groups has been like something that I've definitely kind of not necessarily disliked as much as been kind of upset with, because I think that understanding the entire holistic view of how our communities are and how our world is so important. that I do like the idea of being able to get perspective on things that isn't just from what we call smart kids. Because I think that there is some genuine understanding that can be learned from students that aren't like me. And I think that that's really important. It's also really hard. And so I appreciate the work.
There we go. I'll kind of echo what Henry's saying because I can speak to my own experience. I didn't go to elementary school at Byram, which is the elementary school I would have gone to if I went to a public school. I went to Mitch. And so the transition from Mitch to Hazelbrook was odd because I wasn't already in the tag program. So I had to like go through the specific processes to test into it at the time. And a lot of my classes in middle school were a singular class, and there was like 2 different tracks, like one for the tag students, one for everyone else. And I don't know if I noticed it in the moment, like when I was in middle school, but I think looking back on it, I definitely don't think I liked that differentiation so much. I appreciated the effort to challenge me, but I thought it was kind of othering I don't know. And that was just like my experience. And I think I have that same experience when it's implemented at the school level. So I really appreciate you guys working to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah. Henry. I would just add that my personal experience in high school really ties into my beliefs about almost representation, but it's like I wouldn't be sitting at this table if I didn't have a freshman year that I determined for myself was like lackluster. And I had that huge like improvement and growth that made me push to where I am today. And I think about things through that lens of growth and having come from a place of what I call the middle of the bell curve. But I think that in of itself, like that story, I think is just so important because there is that potential for all students. And I firmly believe that. And so I think that getting that exposure and getting that understanding is important for our next generation of leaders in every realm, be it politics, school boards, or any of the natural sciences. And so I just deeply appreciate the idea that we would be able to have that understanding in school.
Great discussion. Other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here and we appreciate the update. Okay. With that, we'll move to our final report and discussion item, first reading of board policies with presenter Director Debbie Ebert. And so this is a first reading. So all of these policies will be back prior to adoption. Great.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have
There we go. Tonight we have the updates from OSBA's January 2022 update. And the first policy we have tonight is DH. So I have asked Director Moore to join me in case we have any questions about DH that I'm not as esteemed to answer as he is. The information that we received from OSBA regarding loss coverage, what was labeled bonded employees and officers, is in the explanation, and we don't have much more than that. The language has been revised to reflect current terms and practices. I looked up all the legal references this evening during the board meeting. ORS 328441, 332-525, and then the OAR 581-022-2405. And I didn't see anything in there that was different from the language that is being presented in the new gray language here. So I think it literally is an update to terms.
So just a few clarifying questions, just so they're on the record. David, Director Moore, does this language change? Will this change our practices in any way? Will anything be different in the way we do business after this is adopted than it is now?
No, I think it's probably been 10 years or more that the district has been obtaining crime coverage. And probably longer we've been obtaining crime coverage, but the legal advice given, legal and insurance advice given is that a bond would be duplicate coverage on top of crime coverage, because the crime coverage covers everything, whether it happens inside the premises or outside the premises. Because a fidelity bond used to be taken out for the superintendent and the finance official that was responsible for maintaining funds and obligating the district.
So just putting a razor sharp point on this. This isn't going to trigger us buying new coverage for board members or for the superintendent after this is passed.
No.
Okay.
This is what we've been doing and most districts have been doing in Oregon for the last decade at least.
Okay. I appreciate that. Director Irvin.
Minor. I just wanted to, because there seemed to be some concern or confusion earlier in the evening about this, that things were stricken from the language. And I just wanted to point out to the public that may be listening that while everything is read is struck out in the new language, it still specifically says bond coverage or equivalent crime coverage. So while it was said that we had struck it in crime from the record and somehow that was going to cause all these other shady things happening, is actually still in the new language, just in a different part of the paragraph. So I just wanted to point that out to the public that it is still in there, just in a different place.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yeah, Vice Chair Lynn.
What I felt like I heard you say, Director Moore, was that it eliminates like a duplication of coverages.
Yeah. And we haven't had those duplications in recent years because the guidance came out about, I think it was 2012, that a Portland attorney's office issued a legal opinion to PACE, which is our insurance coverage, saying it's not required to have both a bond and crime coverage. The crime coverage basically covers all employees, not just the superintendent and the finance official. Any fraudulent acts, any misuse of public funds.
Well, even that's interesting though, because the assertion was that somehow we're purchasing more coverage to protect us, but what you're actually saying is we're adopting less coverage. Okay. Don't want to detour on this too much, but
The district paid for that coverage before, and the district will pay for that coverage going forward. And so the charge that taxpayers are only going to
it's not true. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Director Moore, for sharing that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Is there something you said though about the process? What you pointed out, Tristan, is that the language in blocks of words are similar, but it may look to people like everything's been eliminated, just because of visually how it's here. So maybe something to think about for the future.
Yeah. In most of our policies, it is more precise. We're taking out this and that. And I think just because there were so many changes, they just did a wholesale. I don't know, Director Ebert, if you have any insight.
I don't, and this is such a short policy, that also could be a factor. Most of our policies are not this short.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again for the discussion on that. I know we didn't anticipate this being a deep dive, but appreciate the insight.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so we're marking that one as good to go for a second read then.
Good to go.
Okay. All right. The next one is for it's an information item. Cabinet has approved this new AR with the elimination of deleting EEAB. What we've done is just combine EEA with an AR that used to be EEAB. So any questions about that? Just cleans it up, puts the routing information with the correct policy.
Looks good.
Okay. Okay, the next cleanup is a required GBL. And we are deleting GBLA and combining both of those policies. The resulting changes are proposed in this issue, which includes the deletion of GBLA in lieu of changes made to model sample policy GBL on personnel records. The second page is where the additional language has been added. Good to go?
Looks like it, yep.
Okay. Pardon me?
Thank you for breaking that down to separate paragraphs. I think those
Sure.
three great paragraphs for you to thoroughness.
Okay, the next couple are ARs under special education. And you can see that House Bill 3183 triggered these changes passed in the 2021 legislative session, requiring districts to provide information at the IEP meeting about relevant services and placements offered by the district, the ESD, regional programs, and the Oregon School for the Deaf. House Bill 2105 passed in the 2021 legislative session and also require districts to provide information and resources to students of transition age regarding supported decision-making as a less restrictive alternative to guardianship, and with information and resources regarding strategies to remain engaged in the student's secondary education and post-school outcomes. In addition, the Oregon ORA 581-015-2200 adds content of the IEP to include requiring information about supported employment services when the district is holding an IEP meeting when the student is 16 years of age or as early as 14 years of age if transition services are part of the IEP discussion. So these next two ARs add that information. And Carol joined us in our policy committee. Had her lens on this as well.
Vice Chairman.
What page are you on?
5, next week.
Okay.
71, I just have a double word. Not words that include parents. And then the same thing on 71.
71.
B.
B.
Services.
Oh, see it, yep. Okay. So page 5, 6. Okay, any questions on the procedural safeguards?
Under the C, 2A, native language. Does that need separation?
Yes, thank you. Oh, these are long ones. Okay. And then the last update is a required policy as well, has new language that was added from Senate Bill 486. Amends ORS 343397 by adding a requirement that each talented and gifted student and students' parents have the opportunity to discuss with the district the programs and services available to the student and to provide input on the programs and services to be made available. It also adds a requirement for the plan to include the name and contact information for the district's coordinator of special education services and programs for talented and gifted students.
My only question on this one is there was some discussion at the policy committee meeting about who this individual will be, or is that all ironed out and ready to be published on the website now?
For the, it's already there.
It's already there. So we're already in compliance. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a whole website dedicated to tag.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank
Okay.
you, Director Ebert.
You're welcome.
All right, with that, we'll move to action items part 2 on the agenda. And the first one in part 2 is a second reading of 2022-2023 district student transfers, inter and in-district transfers with presenter Director Tracy Rose. Director Rose.
Good evening.
There we go.
Per our conversation at the last board meeting, we took the feedback from all of you and went back and took a look at what we proposed, and we are here this evening, Cocoa in spirit, to propose that we move forward for 22-23 school year with an inter-district transfer process of 50 students coming into the district and 50 students released, and with unlimited consideration for hardships. And with that, I am happy to answer any further questions you might have, or ask that you approve the process so we can post and get started.
I really appreciate the clear, it is super clear on what our caps are, how we're going to handle it. All hardships will be considered. I love the way that it's presented. Any questions or concerns? All right, then I would entertain a motion.
I move that the Tigard-Tualatin School Board of Directors approve the second reading of the 2022-23 district student transfers, inter and in-district transfers as presented.
I second.
Motion's been made by Director Zerschmied and seconded by Director Jaimes. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Director Rose. And with that, we'll move to our next action item, stucco wall repairs and recoding at Byram and Mary Woodward Elementary Schools with Director Moore.
First of several actions. The stucco wall repair and improvement project is on our district obligation, so we'll run it out back in December. And so the pricing for this. Start over?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Sorry about that. So the stucco wall repair and recoating project at Mary Woodward and Byram is a project that was on the bond prioritization schedule back in December. And the district has received co-op pricing from Technical Waterproofing, Inc. For the repair. The total bid for Byram is $220,480. For Mary Woodward is $228,470. And both of these systems are at the end of their lives, and it's appropriate to do it at this time The bond oversight committee, shared back in December, has seen these projects on the list and approves to move forward. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And we also have, if there's technical questions, we do have Debbie Pearson with us virtually too.
Thank you as always for being here, Debbie. Any questions, concerns? Seems to me this is the prudent thing to do to increase the lifespan of our buildings. So with that, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the award of contract through a cooperative agreement to Technical Waterproofing, Inc. for the Ttsd stucco wall repairs project at Byram Elementary and Mary Woodward Elementary in the bid amount of $448,950.
Second.
Motion's been made by Director Jaimes and seconded by Director Zerschnee. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
It's extraordinarily unsexy work, but it's extremely important to maintain the integrity of our buildings. So I'm pleased to see it.
Yep, absolutely. All right, with that, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Next item is the Tualatin High School solar panel installation.
This is another project that was on our list back in December. So we had done some solar work at Creekside, Tualatin Middle School, and also going on at Art Reckon Elementary. So we had a 1.5% requirement for green energy technology throughout our whole $300 million plus bond. So we're $900,000 short of meeting that threshold. And there was a study conducted on whether to complete the remaining projects, either at Tigard or Tualatin High School. And it was determined that Tualatin High would benefit most from the solar panel installation. So this was a low bid project, however, with a qualifier that a low bid based on the largest solar size. So A&R Solar was the largest size, and their bid came in right at 900,000. And so that's the recommendation to make the award to A&S Solar this evening.
I do actually have a question on this one. Might be too technical, but do we have any sense of how the totality of these solar projects are going to impact the district in terms of energy prices? And in what way we'll benefit from, do we directly benefit from the solar production, or how does it work?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Debbie maybe address that question if she caught it.
Hi, this is Debbie Pearson. Yes, I did catch it. At Art Reckon and at Creekside, those two facilities were designed to be net zero, meaning that the generation of the solar for those projects would equal to or be greater than the use of energy at those sites. As for Tualatin Middle School, I don't recall the exact number. It was not a net zero installation. My recollection is something closer to 50%, but I can get that number for you. But it is significant in the amount of energy that it too generates.
That's awesome. And my other technical question here is, so we have this 1.5% requirement. At the end of the lifespan of these solar panels, are we then required to re-up them? Or is it a one-time spending requirement of 1.5%? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a one-time spending based on the dollar volume that you're putting in place for this bond or any public project.
Got it. And do we know the anticipated lifespan of the solar panels?
You know, I have to be honest, I don't actually have that off the top of my head. I can get that for you.
Okay, that'd be interesting, because I know the technologies develop pretty rapidly and they're lasting a long time, but that would be interesting. Anyway, those are just my questions. Any other questions?
I have one question and also one comment. So the handy dandy Googles, tells me that 100 kilowatts of power will generate enough for 25 to 50 homes if they're not all running AC. So 530 kilowatts is going to be 5.3 times that. So that's
That's
100
great.
and some homes worth of electricity. So it's substantial. My question is, at Creekside, the solar panels come with a monitor system so that the students can see what the electricity being generated is, and then they can do science and math problems and exercises with that. Will this have the same monitors attached to it, or is that something we need to add on later?
They do at Reckon. I'll jump in, David, sorry. They do have that same system at Rutkin, where they will. That was part of the bid. And I believe we also have it at Tualatin Middle School.
Tualatin High School, you mean?
Yes, and Tualatin Middle School, at all the facilities. It's a software package that is included that allows them to be able to log in and see what's going on with the system, as you've indicated, and then to be able to use that in their curriculum as well.
Great.
Excellent, thank you. Because it's all about the education.
All right. If there's no further questions, I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the award of contract to A&R Solar for the solar panel installation at Tualatin High School in the bid amount of $900,000.
Motion's been made by Director Zerschmied. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Hyman. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. And with that, we'll move to 12th High School scoreboard contracts. Director Moore.
Yeah, we'll take a break from bond projects and address a fundraising project at Tualatin High School. And that's a new video display scoreboard to go on the opposite end of the field of the current scoreboard at the stadium field. So this would be on the north side. And we've been in discussions, both the operations staff, Darren and his team, and I with the administration and the Pathbackers group for several months regarding this project. And back in January, Dr. Riki Smith and staff, along with high school administration, heard a presentation from the Pathbackers group, and to basically solidify that they have raised approximately $150,000 that would pay for the scoreboard itself, in addition to the installation. There's some other costs related to installation, including the electrician and trenching, which there would have to be further fundraising for. But the total contract, actually there'd be 3 contracts in this particular project, because there's not a general contractor. The district would be managing the project. And so we have the scoreboard itself from Daktronics for $123,003. The sign installation, or the scoreboard installation from ES&A Sign and Awning for $29,942. And then Farnham Electric would do the electrical for $10,806. So this is one of those types of projects where we can't pull apart each piece, and we have to look at it as a total contract. So it will be a BOLI prevailing wage project. So both the install and electrical go up a little bit because of that. But the total amount of contracts we're asking for approval tonight are $163,751. The scoreboard itself does fall under a cooperative agreement in pricing with the Intermountain ESD. And the preliminary estimate we got from one of the common contractors we use for the trenching is $8,400. It's not part of this package because there still is some refinement related to scope and pricing about where they'll be connecting into for the power source. And longer term, there's the hope to generate advertising revenue through this digital scoreboard that would help. There's about at least a $25,000 gap between what's been fundraised and what the total estimated costs are. So any advertising revenue that would come in from the scoreboard initially would cover that gap. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. I tried to give some of the presentation in the board materials from the Packmakers group, including some images of what the scoreboard would look like. It has, I think, triple functionality, not only the score, but video and then advertising. And it's been a long-term vision for Tualatin High, and then Packmakers has stepped forward in recent years to set aside their fundraising dollars for this purpose.
So I just want to clarify, so the Packmakers are going to turn over their fundraising to the district, so the district can buy the equipment at their preferential rate. And then as ad revenue comes in, the Packmakers will pay back the district. Basically, the district's going to front $25,000, it sounds like, to cover this. And then the Packmakers will pay us back until the bill is settled.
Yeah, we're still in discussion of who's going to own the advertising contract, because it's probably not appropriate for a boosters group that's a 501c3 to gain revenue off our property. So I'm trying to massage that one with them and get them convinced that we need any agreement with the advertising group needs to be in the district's name, not in the boosters group name. So actually the dollars would be coming into the district and school, and we would maintain them at the district level. And so the first $25,000 that comes in would go to cover that gap.
Okay. Are there any other places in the district where we have a revenue stream from advertising?
Other than, I know we've done some, the old style fundraising, like in any sports programs and that type of thing. That would be an example that we have currently. No, I don't think anything digitally like this would be.
Could be something different. Okay. It kind of raised concerns for me because it harkens back to the last time we did sort of an advertising deal back when we had Coke machines in our schools, and how complicated that got very quickly. And so I want to make sure it's not going to have any kind of encumbrance like that for us.
Yeah, I think it's part of the reason why I wanted to be the district to be in control of the term, so that we can get the terms and conditions that are agreeable to the district, because if the Packmakers group signs an agreement that may not have terms that are favorable to the school or district, we may run into issues like you're saying that maybe we've had in the past.
And I assume we have the same limitations on who can advertise on that. We have some control, like the local dispensary, we can't.
Right.
Okay. And then I think I heard you say, but I just want to make sure for the record, you've spoken to operations and they have the bandwidth to take on this project. Because I'm frequently hearing that operations is a little over.
Yeah,
extended.
It's going to be a challenge, I think, especially if it happens during the summertime with other projects going on. Some of these other ones we're considering, we've considered at recent board meetings and this evening, but I think it'll be all hands on deck for sure.
We can do it.
If you couldn't hear that,
Alrighty
Director
then.
Bernard said we can do it.
And then, final question, when I'm looking at the picture, it sure looks like the scoreboard goes where the discus throwers could accidentally swing a discus. And I'm misreading the,
We'll have to repeat, they probably won't be able to hear me.
I would just hate for an errant discus to go flying through the new scoreboard. That would be really bad.
Once the nets are up for the discus ring, so they all go out towards the field. So once track season starts, they'll put up the nets that surround the discus ring, and the scoreboard will be behind that.
Okay.
So there's very little chance, as long as kids are using the discus ring and using it correctly, that they'll hit the scoreboard.
All right, good. And the javelin throws.
Yep, go in the opposite direction.
Okay, good. Excellent. Just wanted to make sure.
So just wanted to say this is actually really exciting, and kudos to the packbackers for doing the fundraising to make this happen. This is going to be very cool for the community. And Director Bernard, you might be able to answer this. So two related questions. One, I assume the scoreboard will be operational for all sports that use the field.
Correct.
And B, if we oftentimes have rec leagues, et cetera, who rent the field. Will the scoreboard be operational when rented by outside parties potentially, or do we know yet?
Potentially, I think as we, really develop our make some adjustments to our IGA and build those relationships with the city. Currently, they've had access at times, but it requires us to open up the press box, train someone how to use the scoreboard and things like that. So typically, we have not let outside groups use our scoreboard without it being a school-sponsored activity, just because of all the setup and things like that. But there's the potential for that for sure.
Great. That's exciting. Other questions or comments? All right, then I would entertain a motion. It does not have to come from Director Search.
Okay, in that case, I move to approve the award of contracts for the Tualatin High School Video Display Scoreboard Project, including $123,003 to Daktronics, $29,942 to ES&A Sign and Awning, and $10,806 to Farnham Electric.
I'll second.
Motion's been made by Vice Chair Lynn and seconded by Director Urban. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. All right, thank you, Director Bernard. Next item is Resolution 2122-16, HVAC upgrades procurement exemption.
So I don't recall with this board if we've had this request as part of our bond projects, but normally with construction, everything by law is by low bid, unless the governing body approves an exemption like this that we're requesting this evening. So we have the mechanical upgrade projects planned at Hazelbrook and Fowler, in addition to Tualatin High School. And over the life of this bond, from time to time, it makes sense to ask for an exemption from competitive bidding when it's appropriate, that not only is the contract award based on price, but also qualifications of the proposers. So that's what this is all about. Because we don't want to get in a situation where we award something on low bid and it may not be we find out down the road that they're not a qualified contractor to do our work. So there's some steps to go through to get to this point where we're asking for the exemption this evening. We have to publish in a local trade publication like the Daily Journal of Commerce that we're doing this. And then we have to have a hearing, which we held Friday. Nobody showed up, so nobody cares except you guys. So that's what this is all about. And then later, we'll go through our process of a request for proposal, put a committee together, evaluate the proposals based on the terms that we include in the RFP, and then we'll bring another recommendation later to award the work to the winning proposal.
Makes
Any
sense.
questions?
Questions, comments, concerns? All right, would entertain a motion.
I move to approve resolution 2122-16, adopting findings of fact granting exemption from competitive bidding for the 2022 mechanical upgrades project by means of qualifications plus a bid and authorizing selection by request for proposals.
All right.
Second.
Thank you. A motion's been made by Director Urban and seconded by Director Jaimes. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we will move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. And with that, we'll move to our final action item of the evening, joint operations and use of sports and athletic fields, memorandum of understanding with the City of Tigard and City of Tualatin. Director Moore.
Yes, thank you. This action item is a follow-up to the joint meeting we had with elected officials of all of you, plus the councils at City of Tigard and Tualatin. And the direction forward from that meeting was to explore, continuing exploring an agreement for joint use and operation of field facilities throughout the jurisdictions. And so what this action item does is authorize the superintendent to sign an MOU that addresses the intent to enter into an IGA between all three jurisdictions to continue moving toward an endpoint of having this joint agreement between all three jurisdictions.
This is, I mean, we've talked about this before. Excellent, excellent work. I appreciate everything laid out in the MOU. And I also appreciate, I don't know if folks saw the Westland situation where they had things went sideways over there. So I appreciate the way this is framed. If at any time a party wants to exit this MOU, we have the ability to do that. So questions or concerns? Vice Chair Lynn.
I just say I'm impressed with how quickly this all came together. I mean, it's very, very well done.
All right. Is there a motion?
I move to authorize the superintendent to execute the MOU as presented, documenting the intent to develop an IGA between Tigard-Tualatin School District, City of Tualatin, and City of Tigard for the increased public use of sports and athletic fields within their service areas.
And I'll second.
All right, motion's been made by Director Searchmead and seconded by Vice Chair Lynn. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Director Moore. And with that, we'll move to the second public comment portion of the agenda. I just want to make sure before we adjourn is, sorry, I'm trying to find Lenore. Is Lenore Schaefer in? Do not see Lenore. Okay, then I believe, Patty, can you confirm we don't have any other public comment? Okay, then with that, I will adjourn the meeting at 9:43 p.m. Thanks, everyone.